I never imagined my life would unravel like this. One night, I caught my wife, Iona, in the arms of another man. 7 years of lies, and the kids I thought were mine weren't. My own parents sided with her, slapping me when I needed them most. I couldn't believe the betrayal. I hired detectives to gather proof, and what I found shattered my world. Iona's pathetic excuse, "It was just sex," only fueled my anger. I had to take revenge, not just for me, but for the life she destroyed. This is my story, my journey from heartbreak to redemption. "Thank you for agreeing to do this interview," said Sophie Dale, the female reporter from Music Insider. She placed the recorder on Magnus Condon's coffee table in his home in Montana. "I'm Sophie Dale, but you can call me Safi," she said, extending her hand. Magnus noted her grip was firm and strong, which he appreciated compared to the weak handshakes he usually got. "No problem," Magnus replied, trying to stay calm. He had wanted to be a rock star since he was 10 years old and read his first issue of the magazine. With his long, dark hair and trimmed beard, he looked very different from his younger, clean-cut self. His deep blue eyes glanced at Safi without much interest. Women, especially teenagers, had been interested in him ever since he joined Straza Smrti, which means Death Watch. "So tell our readers, what's it like being the lead guitarist in a death metal band?" Safi asked, ready to take notes in her notepad. "Everything I hoped for when I was 10, Magnus laughed. "Oh, so you wanted to be in the music business that young?" Safi asked, smiling warmly. Her brown eyes sparkled in the soft light of the room. "Doesn't everyone?" Magnus asked, raising an eyebrow. "Good point," Safi chuckled. "I've done some background research." "I know," Magnus said casually. "You read my work?" Safi asked, surprised. Most musicians she interviewed barely knew about the magazine. "Yeah." "I hope you enjoy the articles," Safi said, blushing. "They're insightful," Magnus nodded. "Thank you for that," Safi said, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "So take us back to the day you joined Straza Smrti." "Do we have to go back that far?" Magnus asked, knowing it was a tough time for him. "Yes, we do," Safi nodded, her pen tapping her notepad as she noticed a change in his eyes. She knew about his upcoming divorce and had even interviewed his ex-wife. "You've talked to my ex-wife?" Magnus asked, his eyes narrowing. "Yes, I looked deeply into my subjects' backgrounds. I'm sorry if it makes you uncomfortable." "Whatever," Magnus said, waving her off. "Iona is no longer my concern. I stopped caring a long time ago," he said coldly. "My, I can feel the temperature dropping in here," Safi said, trying to lighten the mood. "If you talked to her, then you know why," Magnus said bitterly. "But it was because of that you are here now, isn't it?" Safi asked. "Why don't you take us back to that day?" "Your readers really want to know this," Magnus asked, reluctant to relive the past. After Safi nodded, he sighed. "Fine, but I won't sugarcoat it." "Wouldn't want you to," Safi said, smiling. "I always wanted to be a rocker, but my parents told me to put my dream aside and think about my future. Did that stop me from practicing for hours on my grandfather's '58 Gibson guitar?" Magnus looked at the old guitar. "No," he said, returning his attention to Safi. "My parents called it a hobby. Sure, I played too loudly and wasn't good at first, but who is?" Magnus asked. "My grandfather always said, do what you love, regardless of what anyone thinks. He told me that the day he gave me his guitar and then he died. Over the years, I got better but never joined a band. My parents' negativity hurt my self-esteem. Then I met Iona when I was 17. It's weird what love can do, isn't it?" Magnus asked. And Safi nodded. "At 19, I asked Iona to marry me. We were too young, but I didn't care. I loved her." "Do you still love her?" Safi asked, looking at her notes from her interview with Iona. "No," Magnus said coldly. "That's a lot of anger you have for your ex-wife," Safi noted, seeing the unhappiness in his blue eyes. "Wouldn't you, if you found your spouse with someone else?" "I don't know. I've never been married," Safi said, tapping her pen against her chin. "Why don't you tell me about it?" "Well, Iona and I dated for 2 years before we got married. For the first 4 years, everything seemed great. I worked for my father after high school, but I was always seen as the black sheep because I wanted to be a musician. My brother Bill was being groomed to take over the company. I, on the other hand, had to work my way up from the bottom. Iona went to school to be a paralegal, and we would come home to our apartment each night. Even when I was tired, I made sure she was happy. Everything was good until the middle of our 5th year of marriage. Mind if we take this outside? Magnus asked, glancing at his pack of cigarettes. Sure, Safi said, leaning forward. She pressed the stop button on the recorder. Would you like water or something else? Magnus asked politely. Beer, if you have any, Safi said, smiling as she got up from the leather love seat. I might have some, Magnus muttered as he led Safi into his kitchen. He opened the fridge and handed her a cold bottle after popping off the cap. Thanks, Safi said, running her finger along his as she took the bottle. No problem, but that's the only one. I can't have you driving drunk, Magnus said as he led her to the back patio. Kind and with a nice view, Safi muttered, taking a sip of her beer. She watched how he opened his pack of cigarettes and lit one. The flame highlighted his dark hair. She set the recorder on the table and pressed record. So, you were talking about the 5th year of your marriage, Safi said, bringing him back to the story. Well, Magnus blew out a cloud of smoke as he looked out at his 100 acres. It started in early November. Iona began staying late at work, sometimes coming home at midnight or later. She always said she and that jerk. You mean Connor Baggs, right? Safi asked, checking her notes. Yes, but I'll never say his name, Magnus replied with anger. I heard his wife got almost everything in the divorce, Safi said, noticing his sly grin. Good. I hope it hurt him. Not one to forgive and forget, huh? Safi asked, eyeing him. Do I seem like that type? Magnus said, taking a puff of his cigarette. No, you don't, Safi agreed, sipping her beer. So, like I was saying, Iona and that jerk always had big cases to work on late at night. I knew her well enough to tell when she was lying. Her right eye would twitch. If everything was okay, why lie? I get that, Safi nodded, feeling his pain. In January, I went to her office when she said she had to work late. I'd had enough. I tried to keep our marriage together. I didn't ask her to quit, just to work less so we could be close again. Was that too much to ask? Magnus inquired. Sounds fair to me. Exactly, Magnus said, gesturing wide. But not to Iona. She said I didn't understand. I decided to surprise her with dinner at work. The night guard knew me, so I got in easy. When I reached her desk, she wasn't there. Then I heard something. I turned, and the warmth from the lasagna I brought hit my leg as I went to check. I wish I hadn't, Magnus said, sadness in his voice. What did you see? Safi asked, knowing it would make a great story. My wife on the conference table with that jerk. They didn't see me or hear the bag drop when I froze. The sounds they made filled the room. Thankfully, I took some photos. I knew then our marriage was over. She ended it the moment she cheated. Now I had proof, and in Mississippi, it's a fault state. So I knew I'd win big in the divorce. Adultery is still a crime there, even if no one gets arrested anymore. I left the food on the floor and walked away, losing my appetite. I pulled out my phone and called my wife's number. I heard her phone ringing at her desk as I passed by. She didn't want to be interrupted by me while she was cheating. I bet you left her a voicemail? Safi asked, hiding a smile, knowing this story would thrill her editor. She giggled as Magnus rolled his eyes. Of course! When it went to voicemail, I told her not to bother coming home. She could stay with her lover. Then I said, oh wait, he's married. How does it feel knowing you wrecked 2 marriages? I told her to pick up her stuff in the morning or I'd throw it out. I didn't want to see her again. When I got home, I packed all her things in trash bags and put them outside. I didn't care if they were still there in the morning. Around 11, my phone buzzed like crazy. They must have seen the spilled lasagna or heard my voicemail. I didn't answer. Instead, I called Carrie Baggs. I told her what I saw and sent her the pictures. How did I have her number? Magnus asked, seeing Safi's curious look. She gave it to me at the first company event, saying the spouses met once a month to support each other. I never went, but I kept her number. I'm glad I did. Even though it hurt to tell her, Carrie needed to know the truth. After she calmed down, she thanked me for the pictures and hung up. Then the texts from Iona flooded in. I turned off my phone. I didn't want to hear her excuses. Nothing she said could be trusted. Once was enough to end our marriage. I could never trust her again. As I was about to go to bed, my anger turning to hate, my front door swung open. "I don't know why she even bothered," Magnus said, flicking his ashes. "So, what did she say to explain her cheating?" Safi asked, her eyes glancing at his chest. She wondered how someone could leave such a handsome man for an older, out-of-shape guy. "She said she did it for us, that it didn't mean anything, that it was just physical," Magnus said, crushing his cigarette. His fingers ran through his beard as he shook with anger. "I told her to shove that excuse. Nothing I did deserved her cheating. She was selfish, not caring how her actions would break us. I enjoyed seeing the horrified look on her face. I told her to get her stuff and leave my apartment since it was in my name. She ran out crying, but I didn't care. Maybe a little because I gave her 7 years of my life for nothing. I spent the next week looking for a good lawyer. I took out half of our savings and checking account money so she couldn't touch it. I opened a new account in my name only. We had been saving to buy a house. Thank God we didn't. I didn't want a house reminding me of her. And thankfully we never had kids, so I didn't have to deal with her if we did. I didn't know or care where Iona was staying. She could have been dead in a ditch for all I cared. That was until I saw my mom's car pulling into my apartment complex. Ever since I brought Iona home to meet my parents, they liked her. They treated her like a daughter since she was an orphan until she turned 18. When I told them we were getting married, they were thrilled. Then there was a loud knock on my door. My mom demanded that I open it. I hadn't been to work all week, so they were worried about me. But what happened next made me glad I didn't go, Magnus said, pulling out another cigarette to calm his nerves. "Magnus, open up!" my mom yelled. I sighed, knowing I had to tell them sooner or later that Iona and I were divorcing. When I opened the door, my mom stood there with an angry look on her face, and behind her was Iona. Her head was down. She wouldn't even look at me. She had been caught red-handed. Then my mom yelled at me, saying I was being foolish. She said Iona made a stupid mistake and that we could fix it if I stopped being stubborn and just listened to her. "Your own mom took your wife's side?" Safi asked, surprised. "I know, shocking, right?" Magnus said with some sarcasm. "You'd think my own parents would back me up for once, but nope, they chose her over me." So what happened next? I stood there at my doorway, stunned. Anyone would be when your parents side with someone who lied and cheated on you. I asked my mom if she was really taking Iona's side over mine. She mumbled about saving the marriage and claimed I was being stubborn. She wanted us to go inside to avoid making a scene. I didn't care who heard. My neighbors already knew enough when I found out about Iona cheating. I looked straight at my mom and said, "No, if you can't support me when she—" The slap caught me off guard. It was the first time my mom ever hit me. She told me never to call a woman that. I replied, if she can't stay faithful, she shouldn't be shocked when she's called names. I added, she lied, cheated, and ruined everything we had. I don't want to be your son anymore. Since you care so much about her, let her be your daughter. I'll just go my own way. My mom didn't think I'd dare say that. She said I didn't know what I was saying and was letting my anger control me. I usually stay calm, but when I do get mad, it's like a storm breaking everything in its path. So I told my mom, or my birth giver since I don't have parents anymore, that I was serious. I told her to tell my dad I quit. Then I slammed the door in their faces. Whatever my wife wanted to say, I never found out. 3 weeks later, my lawyer told me my wife had been officially served. Turns out my parents were paying for her lawyer, Magnus said, looking out at his land. Really? They paid for her lawyer? Safi gasped as Magnus nodded. That's why I don't love them anymore. I've heard they let her stay with them since we split up. That's just messed up, Safi said, shaking her head. Tell me about it, Magnus said, flicking his ashes. So when we went to court, I knew it was going to be a fight. The judge ordered us to go to counseling to try to save the marriage. I flatly refused. I wasn't going to waste another second on her when she didn't even have the guts to end our marriage before cheating. If she had done that, I would have respected her more. Instead, she took the coward's way out. When the judge warned I'd be in trouble if I didn't comply, I didn't hold back. Safi laughed. As the bailiffs led me away, I made it clear how I felt about my wife and the judge. So how long did they hold you? Safi asked, raising an eyebrow. 30 days, Magnus said proudly. Wow, in 2 months you lost your wife and spent a month in jail. Totally worth it. It meant I didn't have to see that woman for a whole month, I was in heaven, Magnus chuckled. So what did you do when you got out? Safi asked, interested in his story. At first, nothing. I had about 10 grand in the bank, so I knew I'd be okay for a bit. Then I read about Bobby Dean's death. The former guitarist for Straza Schmerti? Safi asked. The one and only, Magnus nodded. Your magazine reported that the band was holding auditions for his replacement a week after his funeral. While death metal isn't normally my thing, my grandma would have called it noise with all the screaming. I thought, what the heck? What did I have to lose, right? He asked, looking at Safi. I didn't have a wife, a marriage, or a family that supported me, so with a little help from Google, I learned how to make a good video. I researched Bobby Dean and watched their videos to see how he played. I didn't want to replace him, just honor his style. I'd say it worked, Safi said, smiling. Who knew? I didn't think Halima or the others would even watch the video I sent. But 2 weeks later, I got quite the surprise. How did you react when you learned you made it to the next round? Safi asked, liking this side of him. His smile was much nicer than his angered look. I was thrilled. I knew I played well, but getting a chance to play for a band like Straza Schmerti? I was excited and nervous, Magnus said with a small smile. Why were you nervous? I'd never been in a band before, and I'd never played in front of strangers, Magnus said, looking down shyly. So who usually got to hear your music? Safi asked, enjoying his blush. My grandma. Before my grandpa died, he always played flamenco and malaguena for her, especially at sunset. When I was little, I would watch her dance on the porch. She always had rosy cheeks when she danced. My grandpa inspired me to play the guitar. He said, music knows no bounds, only joy. It didn't matter where the music came from as long as it was played from the heart, Magnus said, a bit sad as he remembered his grandpa. He sounds like a wise man, Safi said, placing her hand on his, her thumb brushing the back of his hand softly. He was, Magnus nodded. When I got good enough before I met Iona, I went to my grandma's house and played Dark Gypsy to get her attention. I knew she could hear me through the open windows. I smiled when I heard the screen door open and saw her standing there. Then I played flamenco. She covered her mouth with her hands as she watched me. She feared she'd never hear the music again after my grandfather died. My heart swelled with confidence as she started to dance. She must have been so happy, Safi said, her fingers running along his hand. She was. I made sure to play for her whenever I could before sunset, to let her know my grandfather's spirit still lived in me. Are you still in touch with her? Of course I am. I distanced myself from my parents, not my grandmother. Back to my story. I read the email they sent me over and over, thinking it was a joke. The date they wanted me there stared at me like it might swallow me whole. I paced my apartment, debating whether to confirm. The money for the ticket wasn't the problem. It was the fear of freezing up. So I sent the confirmation before I could back out. My face fell into my hands, wondering what I had done. After an hour of second-guessing, I bought the plane ticket and made arrangements for my mail and other things while I was gone. I didn't know how long I'd be away, so I covered my bases. My grandmother took me to the airport. She was the only one I told where I was going. She wished me luck and hugged me. I could see how proud she was, knowing my grandfather would have been overjoyed. During the flight, I hoped I wouldn't mess up. I knew I'd be taken straight to their studio once I landed. While I seemed calm, I was a wreck inside as we drove through downtown L.A., Magnus said, pinching his leg to make sure he wasn't dreaming. It still felt like a dream, even after they finished the tour where Bobby Dean had died. What was your first impression of the band? I was starstruck. Even though I didn't listen to their music, I felt intimidated standing before Halima, Brandon, and George. Why did you feel intimidated? Safi asked, writing down her observations. Well, Magnus scratched his cheek, looking to the side. They were professionals. I was just a regular guy, hoping something would go right in my life for once, he said, shrugging. He didn't mention Halima's graceful presence in the director's chair. Her dark hair with brown highlights, her smooth skin, and those deep, dark brown eyes drew him in. Her voice, warm and soft, wrapped around him like a warm blanket. Remembering how her jeans fit snugly around her leg as she stood up, and the way her perfume lingered in the air, Magnus couldn't shake his thoughts about Halima. I have to say, I thought we would never hear a sound like Bobby's again. Halima said, standing before him. I figured you'd appreciate it, and so would the fans, Magnus said, trying to keep calm. He couldn't help but notice her smile and warm brown eyes. After what Iona did to him, he didn't think he'd feel this way again, but Halima's smile made his heart race. And we do appreciate it, Halima said, with the other two members nodding behind her. Bobby was troubled, but he was a good man. Magnus saw tears in her eyes and noticed George brushing away a tear from Brandon's cheek. Clearly there was a bond between them. He hoped their relationship would last longer than his own did. Now that we've heard you play our sound, I want to hear yours. I can do that, Magnus nodded. Good. Whenever you're ready, the floor is yours. Halima stepped back as Magnus set his guitar case down. He opened it, revealing his Gibson, and prepared to play. He tuned it lightly after the long trip and started with Lonnie Mac's I Found a Love. Then Eric Clapton's Tears in Heaven, Charlie Musselwhite's Crazy for My Baby, and Big Fine Hunk of Woman by Rufus Thomas. Is that all? Halima asked, raising an eyebrow, surprised that he had only prepared 4 songs. No. Magnus shook his head and pointed at the acoustic guitar on a stand. Mind if I use this? The other songs won't sound right on an electric guitar. Go ahead, Halima said, gesturing to the instrument, pleased that he could play both types of guitars. Many who auditioned struggled to play one well. Magnus picked up the acoustic and began playing Dark Gypsy, followed by Flamenco and Malaguena. Halima fought the urge to dance as she watched his fingers move over the guitar. Wow, where did you learn to play like that? Brandon asked, shifting in his seat. Watching my grandfather play. I picked up the rest on my own, Magnus replied. What? Magnus asked, snapping back to the present. I asked, how did you get along with the band members once you joined? Safi repeated. Oh, George and Brandon helped me a lot. They let me crash at their place until I found my own and showed me around the city. They were very supportive when they learned about my troubles with Iona. They didn't like that she had cheated on me. Brandon shared how his last boyfriend had been unfaithful while they were on the road. Straight or gay, no one likes a cheater. They tried to get me to go clubbing once I moved to LA, but I wasn't in the mood. Iona's betrayal was still fresh, Magnus said, brushing his hand along his leg. I know the feeling. Safi nodded sympathetically. Did you tell anyone you were leaving Mississippi? Other than my grandmother and my lawyer, no. There was no point. My parents had made their choice clear, so I packed up and left in the dead of night. Then Halima worked me hard. Magnus chuckled lightly. For 12 hours a day for nearly a week, she drilled me on the songs for the remaining 20 shows. His cheeks flushed, as he remembered always finding his eyes on Halima's figure. Then the big day came. I was nervous, but their kind words calmed me as we heard the roar of the crowd through the stadium walls. The Kansas City show? Safi asked, and Magnus nodded. What did you think about it? First, Halima was amazing on stage. The fans loved her too, Magnus said, adding to himself, and she looked wonderful doing it. Second, I saw how fame could go to people's heads. When I got paid for the 20 shows, I decided to look for a new place to stay while we were touring. I didn't want to deal with California's high taxes or the smog. I also wasn't going back to my hometown, which made my grandmother sad, but she understood. I found a house that was being sold because the owners couldn't pay for it anymore, so I bought it. No mortgage and no paparazzi. And that's how we ended up here, Magnus explained, watching Safi turn off the recorder and close her notepad. Magnus, can I call you that? Safi asked, playing with her empty beer bottle. Sure. Would it be okay if I took some pictures of you? Safi asked, hoping to get a great shot for the cover of next month's issue. Yeah, that's fine, Magnus said, raising an eyebrow. Great, Safi said, smiling. Can we go inside to find a good spot? She hid her excitement as Magnus shrugged and stood up. You want to shoot in here? Magnus asked, puzzled, when they stood in his bedroom after walking through the house. Yes, Safi nodded. This room has the best natural light. She pointed to the large windows. And turning off the bathroom light gives a good backdrop. This way, I can get the best shots of you, she said, thinking about more than just photos. She wanted to help him forget about his wife since the divorce wasn't final. She knew they were dragging it out, hoping Magnus would change his mind, but even she could see that wasn't going to happen. Oh, okay, Magnus said, finding it odd. He knew she had been hinting at something during the interview, and the lack of a bra and panties was a clear sign. If she was interested in him, why not just say so? Women were a mystery to him, something he had learned from his time with Iona. "And can you wet your hair and take off your shirt?" Safi asked as she checked her camera. She wanted to see if his muscles were as hard as they looked. "All right," Magnus said, shaking his head slightly. He walked into the bathroom, tossed his shirt into the hamper, and wetted his hair. Standing in the doorway, he turned off the lights. He rested his arms against the doorframe as she directed him. "Look down like you're studying something on the floor," Safi directed, snapping a few pictures. "Now glance those blue eyes at me," she said, kneeling. "Yes, perfect." Her excitement grew as his eyes looked into the camera. "Now give me one of those sly smiles." "Oh my," Safi thought as a drop of water hung on a strand of his hair. His smile made her heart race. "What's that mark on your chest?" Safi asked, noticing a slight mark on his left chest muscle. "I had a tattoo removed a few months back," Magnus said simply. "Of what?" "My future ex-wife's name," Magnus said, bitterness in his voice. "Hope it didn't hurt too much." "She didn't deserve to be on your body," Safi said softly. "So, are we going to do this?" Magnus asked with a sly smile, surprising Safi. "What?" Safi mumbled, feeling nervous as Magnus lowered his arms. "I asked, are we going to do this or not?" Magnus repeated, stepping closer. I don't know what you mean," Safi said, setting her camera on the dresser. "No need to be shy," Magnus said, gently lifting her chin. "This is what you want, isn't it?" he whispered, as he bent down, his lips close to hers. "Yes," Safi answered softly, looking up into his eyes. She didn't resist as Magnus slowly pushed her jacket off her shoulders. Her thumbs brushed along his sides as she pressed her chest against his. His fingers moved down her spine. Safi murmured as the sound of her zipper filled the room. The fabric slid down her legs and pooled at her feet. Goosebumps spread over her skin as his hands roamed over her. She had told him she did thorough research. As her hands moved up his chest, she imagined him working out in the sun, sweat glistening on his skin. She wondered how Iona could give up such an attractive man. She leaned her head back as Magnus kissed down her neck. His fingers swiftly undid the buttons of her shirt. "What?" Safi asked breathlessly as her shirt fell to the floor. Magnus stood silently, looking up and down her body. "You're beautiful," Magnus said, feeling his heart pound. "Thank you," Safi said, standing on her toes. "How about we move this to the bed?" she teased, unbuckling his belt. She pushed his boxer briefs down with his pants and gently led him to the bed. She looked up at him with a smile before kissing him. He didn't know if Halima knew about Iona. Magnus never told her, and he wasn't sure if George or Brandon did either. So he would always join Halima in the bus, sitting in a small booth where she read after a show. Finally, after the 10th show, Halima put down her book and asked, "Are you gay?" "What?" Magnus almost dropped his water bottle. "Are you gay?" Halima asked again, raising an eyebrow. "No, are you?" Magnus shot back, seeing her cheeks turn red. "Why don't I ever see you with any of the women backstage?" Halima asked, ignoring his question. "Are you seeing someone back home?" "That's complicated," Magnus said, scratching his cheek. "It's a long story, and I don't know if you want to hear it." "Magnus," Halima said, moving closer to him, "I ignored the signs that Bobby wasn't okay when we started this band 10 years ago. I'm not making that mistake again. We're not going anywhere until morning. Brandon and George are busy in the back, so go ahead and tell me." Halima listened quietly as Magnus told her about how Iona had changed and how he caught her cheating. Even his parents' reaction seemed unexpected to Halima. "Oh my God, Magnus, I'm so sorry," Halima said, holding his hands. She noticed the faint ring mark on his finger. "It's terrible that you gave her 7 years only to find out she wasn't what she seemed." Magnus took comfort in her touch, seeing understanding in her eyes. "Now I see why you're not interested in those groupies," Halima said softly. "I can't blame you for wanting to focus on yourself. Jumping into bed with someone else wouldn't help." "Speaking from experience?" Magnus asked, and Halima nodded. "Is that why I don't see you with anyone, even though many guys would love to be with you?" Her cheeks turned red again. "If I wanted to be with someone, I could, but—" Tears welled up in her eyes. It was Bobby, wasn't it? Magnus asked, and Halima nodded quietly. Did you still love him before he passed? No, but I still cared for him. It happened years ago, about a year after we got signed and started becoming famous. Bobby let fame change him. I know how you felt when you found your wife cheating. Bobby and I weren't married, but seeing him with other women hurt. Yeah, finding out someone you love is cheating is never easy, Magnus agreed. I'm sorry you had to go through that. Don't feel sorry for me. It's okay to mourn something lost. I probably will too. Iona was the woman I wanted to grow old with. Well, you know how that went, Magnus said. Halima smiled weakly and nodded. It's a shame, Halima said, drying her eyes. What is? I don't date married men. With that, Halima got up, leaving Magnus stunned. Did she know about his feelings for her? Had she seen him looking at her? The smile she gave him as she climbed into her bunk said she knew. The sound from the other room brought him back to the present. He glanced at the clock, noting that 15 minutes had passed. Oh, yes, Magnus, more, Safi begged, holding onto his arms. You like that? Magnus asked, smiling as Safi nodded. Their bodies moved together as he pushed deeper. She pulled him close, kissing him deeply as her legs wrapped around his waist. The sounds of their movements filled the room. Safi shifted and lay on top of Magnus, smiling down as she moved. She rested her hands on his chest. Your ex was foolish to leave you, Safi said softly. Let's not talk about her, Magnus said, caressing Safi's sides. You're right. She doesn't matter when we're together, Safi whispered, leaning in to kiss him. She knew she would leave in the morning, but for now, he was hers. She tossed her head back, silently shouting as she reached her peak. I'm almost there, Safi cried as she felt the height of pleasure. Breathing heavily, she fell onto his chest, a content smile on her lips as she snuggled close to him. Loving how they fit together, she knew she had to write about this. Every woman needed to know how amazing he was. Plus, she wanted to help him move past his ex-wife. If it meant encouraging others through her writing, then she would do it. You haven't finished yet, Safi whispered in his ear. Safi smiled, laughing as Magnus led her to the shower. They kissed as the door closed. Magnus woke up the next day alone. He sighed, knowing Safi had left early. He didn't expect them to date, but she could have said goodbye instead of leaving a note. Dear Magnus, please don't think badly of me. I loved our time together. I can still feel my body tingling from last night. I will always cherish it. However, I'm always traveling, and you don't need that in your life. Honestly, if we got together, I would cheat on you. I just can't help it with musicians I interview. You don't need another woman who cheats on you, and I hope you appreciate my honesty. I also hope you'll find a woman who loves you with all her heart. It just can't be me. Not that I wouldn't enjoy being with you, especially if I were being loved like that every day. If you loved Iona like that, I have no idea why she would cheat on you. You seem like a good guy, straightforward and honest. She must be silly to give up a good and caring guy for that old man I met when I interviewed her. If you're still single, I hope we can do this again. With love, Safi P.S. Count on me to make sure your interview will be accurate. Also, read the last part of the article. I'll leave something special for you there. I hope you'll let me have another chance with you. I'm already missing you. Don't worry, I'm on birth control. Again. I hope you find a woman who loves you and becomes the next Mrs. Condon. Magnus couldn't help smiling. At least he wasn't the only one who thought Iona had made a mistake. Still, being turned down hurt a bit. But Safi's honesty made it easier to handle. He might just take her up on her offer if the chance came again. Rolling over to her side of the bed, he took a deep breath of her lingering scent and fell asleep again. 1 month later. Magnus was in his kitchen making a sandwich. He had just returned from L.A. after a week of recording. As he spread mayonnaise on a slice of bread, he thought about everything. Remembering back to when they were on the highway heading to a city in North Carolina, Magnus relaxed on the couch while Brandon and George were in the bedroom. He played his guitar, strumming a song he wrote after his grandfather passed away. The beginning was light, the middle sad, and the end full of sorrow. Magnus, what song is that? Halima asked as she sat down across from him. You wouldn't know it, Magnus said, playing softly. Okay, she said, taking a sip of water. So what song is it? Halima asked, curious. It's a song I made after my grandfather died, Magnus said. Oh? Her eyebrows rose. Can you play it from the beginning? Does it have words? Sure, and it does, but I'm not a singer like you, Magnus said, blushing. Nonsense, Halima said, waving him off. Please, sing for me. She had noticed how he looked at her on and off stage. After 2 months on the road together, she thought they might have something if they ever gave it a try. Their nightly talks were always deep, and she had begun to see his smile more often. It was a lovely smile, and she enjoyed seeing it. She knew he wasn't over what had brought him to the band, but she wanted to comfort him. You sure? Mm-hmm. Halima nodded, resting her chin in her hand as he began the song. Her heart melted at the sound of his voice. She could tell that with singing lessons, he could join in on songs when needed. She felt warm at the thought of their lips close together. She looked to her left, hearing Brandon's bass join the song and George tapping his sticks on the counter. Halima got misty-eyed as she heard Magnus's voice shake slightly, knowing how much his grandfather meant to him. Man, why didn't you tell us you had that in you? Brandon asked once the song was over. Halima, we have to add it to the next album, George said, and Brandon agreed. What? Magnus said, confused and embarrassed. Magnus, that was such a beautiful song. We can see it means a lot to you. We all work on songs together. Sometimes it's one of mine, sometimes Brandon's or George's. Bobby, even though he had issues, wrote some great tunes. We will respect your wish if you don't want it on the album, but please think about it. I believe it could be a top 10 hit. Please think it over, all right? Halima watched Magnus. She knew his parents' voices were in his head, making him doubt his talent. She saw the uncertainty in his eyes. Dude, I know your parents were hard on you, but that song is amazing. You have to let us play it, George said, smiling at Magnus. He remembered their late-night talks on the road, talking about everything from music to life. Please? Halima asked with a warm smile, holding her hands together. All right, Magnus said shyly. His cheeks turned red as they all cheered. When this tour is over, I'm setting up a meeting with my vocal coach, Halima said, loving the surprised look on Magnus's face. If we're going to play your song, it's only fair that you sing it with me, she said, thinking about all the time they would spend practicing. Plus, maybe you'll finally ask me out, Halima thought to herself. The ringing of his phone interrupted her thoughts. Sorry, I have to take this, Magnus said, quickly standing up when he saw his lawyer's number. Sure, Halima nodded, hoping his wife wasn't delaying the divorce. She watched him close the bedroom door. Later, as Magnus was putting a slice of tomato onto a leaf of lettuce, he wondered who could be calling him. His grandmother usually called in the afternoon after her activities with friends, and she was the only one who had his home and cell phone numbers besides his lawyer. When he moved to L.A., he changed his number to avoid his parents and Iona. Sighing, he set his knife down. If it was a telemarketer, he would be very annoyed. Magnus? His mother's voice on the other end surprised him. It's your mother. I know who you are, Magnus replied coolly. What do you want and how did you get this number? Magnus, please don't be like that. Edna fell and broke her hip. She's the one who gave me your number. She wants you here, his mother said, meaning his grandmother. What hospital is she at? Magnus asked, his eyes looking around, worried about how long his grandmother had been alone. Golden Hills, room 207. Bill and your father are here too. They both want to talk to you. Where have you been? What have you been doing? Where are you living? Why didn't you tell us you were leaving? You know how sad I was when you left without saying goodbye. You know how many nights I worried about you? I know you're angry with me and your father. Magnus ignored all of his mother's rapid questions, refusing to answer. Let me talk to Grandma, Magnus said, holding the phone to his shoulder as he finished making his sandwich, quickly cleaned up, and put the food back in the fridge. He grabbed his plate and hurried to his bedroom to pack. You're not going to answer, are you? His mother sighed when he sternly replied, No. Edna? Edna? Bear with me, Magnus. They have her on some strong pain meds that make her very sleepy. Uh-huh, Magnus mumbled as he chewed. Edna, Magnus is on the phone. He wants to talk to you. Magnus heard his grandmother's mumbled words as his mother handed her the phone. Maggie? A smile touched his lips. She was the only one allowed to call him that. Hey, Grandma. I hear you had a fall, Magnus said, setting the plate on the dresser. He struggled to understand her through the drugs. No, Grandma, I'm not on tour right now, I know. Grandpa would have loved coming along. He could never say no to those young ladies, Magnus teased, his heart lifting at her soft chuckle. Stop it, Maggie, silly boy, Edna said in a tired, drugged voice. I'll be there on the first flight out. I'll see you tomorrow, so you get some rest, Magnus said, pulling his suitcase out. I won't say a word. Magnus could feel her smile through the phone. It had been months since he last saw his grandmother when he had flown home to celebrate good news before leaving town. I love you, Maggie. I'll see you when you get here. Magnus heard his parents' chatter in the background as she placed the receiver on the base. Darn, Magnus hissed as his cell phone rang. He saw his lawyer's number on the screen and wondered what Iona wanted now. Since being served, she had fought the divorce, trying to get everything she could. Magnus recalled the satisfaction of the fight with her lawyer, remembering how therapeutic it felt to vent his anger. Hello? Magnus? The mid-50s male voice came on the line. Yeah? What's going on, Dan? What does Iona want now? Magnus asked with a tired sigh. Nothing. I'm just calling to tell you that she's ready to sign the papers. What? Really? Magnus's excitement was clear. Finally, he would be free from his cheating wife. Yeah, I thought she might ask for alimony or something like that. And? She wants nothing except a meeting with you. If you refuse, she'll continue to fight for everything. Magnus grew quiet, considering what kind of trick she might be planning. Magnus, you still there? Yeah, just thinking, Magnus said, nibbling on his lower lip. I understand. After all this time, all this fighting, I was surprised too. Are you sure she said she wanted nothing? Magnus asked, suspicious of Iona's motives. I have it in writing and notarized to make sure she can't back out. Smart. How long of a meeting did she ask for? 1 hour. Can you do it? Yeah, all right, Magnus said after a moment of hesitation. Great. When can you fly in? I'll have someone pick you up at the airport. I was already planning on flying in. My grandmother is in the hospital. I'm sorry to hear that, Magnus. How about we schedule the meeting for Thursday at 2? That should give you enough time to visit her. That will be fine, Magnus nodded. Okay, Magnus, I'll call her lawyer and confirm. I'll text you the details. Have a safe flight. See you on Thursday. Thursday it is. Magnus couldn't hide his joy. This will all be over soon, Magnus, his lawyer said before hanging up. Yes, Magnus shouted happily. Woohoo! He laughed, thrilled that in 3 days he would be free from Iona. His heart raced with excitement. He would finally be able to ask Halima out on a date, free to get to know her better. He had avoided doing anything before because he knew Iona would make a scene. Ignoring the plastic bag with the newest issue of Music Insider on the table, Magnus locked up his Montana home. As he walked to his car, he scrolled through his contacts. His bag bumped against his leg. He pressed the call button for Halima to tell her he wouldn't make the recording session next week. He placed his bag in the trunk beside his guitar case, listening to the dial tone and feeling nervous, like a teenager calling his first crush. Magnus? What's wrong? Nothing to do with the band. I just wanted to let you know I won't be in L.A. next week, Magnus said as he got into the driver's seat. Oh? Why? Long story short, my grandmother fell and hurt her hip. Plus, my lawyer called, Magnus explained, starting his car and telling her everything that had happened in the past 20 minutes. Oh, Magnus, I know how long you've been waiting for this, Halima said, trying to keep her excitement from her voice. She had been waiting for this too, knowing where she would be on Friday when he was finally single. I'll let George and Brandon know. You have to bring your grandmother to one of our shows someday. We'd all love to meet her. What Magnus didn't know was that she planned on doing that. She wanted to meet the woman Magnus loved so much and understand how to be perfect for him. She also wanted to show his ex-wife what she had missed out on, and she had read the article Sophie Dale wrote about him, making her curious about what Sophie had said. I'll see what I can do, Magnus chuckled as he pulled onto the road. Let me know when you get there, okay? Sure, you'll be the first I call, Magnus said, smiling broadly. I better be, Halima teased before hanging up. As Magnus walked through the airport to his gate, he noticed people giving him odd looks. He wasn't dressed weirdly and his hair wasn't messy. He couldn't figure out why until a teenage girl ran up to him with a magazine. She asked for his autograph, holding out an issue of Music Insider with his picture on the cover. Is it true? The girl asked as Magnus signed the cover. Is what true? Magnus asked, confused. About what you can do with your tongue down. The girl turned red and ran away before finishing her sentence, leaving Magnus standing there, speechless. He noticed many women around him were engrossed in the magazine. He took a deep breath and looked at the cover. What did she write about me? Magnus wondered, regretting not reading the article Sophie had sent him. Walking over to the nearest newsstand, he felt many eyes on him. Do you have the newest Music Insider? He asked the man at the booth. Sure do, the man exclaimed, handing Magnus the last copy. Hey, is that you? He asked as he rang up the sale. Yeah, Magnus said, handing him a $10 bill and telling him to keep the change. He tore open the plastic bag and quickly flipped to the article. He remembered what Sophie had mentioned in her letter. His eyes widened as he read the last part of the article. Well, there you have it. A story of ups and downs that led this man to higher places than he ever thought possible. But that's not all, ladies. Let me tell you, this man is definitely all man. He made me feel amazing all night long. His skills are just perfect, and he knows how to use them well. I lost count of how many times I felt incredible. Magnus Condon made me moan so loud. I have to wonder how big of a mess I left before we moved to the shower, where again Magnus made me feel even better. Before that, though, he painted my face with his love, and I still feel him there as I write this. And yes, I am still feeling amazing. Thank you, Magnus Condon, for that. You were a true gentleman. I couldn't have asked for a better night. Now, I know some of you ladies wonder about his skills. Some of us have had less than great experiences, but this man knows how to make a woman very happy. His skills in making love are beyond words. Magnus stood there, stunned. He finally understood why everyone was looking at him. The article was causing quite a stir. The way he had paid attention to every detail had made her feel amazing. Magnus Condon truly knew his way around making love. One has to wonder how Iona, his estranged wife, could ever give up a man like that. Nevertheless, if she hadn't, I, and maybe you if you're lucky, would never have had the chance to know this man so well. Seriously? Magnus muttered a little too loudly, noting the numerous women perking up around him. He lowered his head, hiding his red face in the magazine as he hurried to his gate. Realizing he had nothing to be ashamed of, he straightened up and thought, who cares if they know? Taking a deep breath, he hollered, Yes, ladies, it's true if you're curious. He laughed as he noticed the surprised faces around him, giving them a playful wave. On the plane, Magnus sat comfortably in first class, reading an article about himself. His grin grew wider when he saw that Safi had written it exactly how he had shared it with her. Can I get you anything? A smooth voice interrupted his thoughts. He looked up to see a young woman with red hair and green eyes wearing a flight attendant's uniform. She leaned forward slightly. Something to drink? A snack? She had heard him at the gate and read his story, turning red as she finished. Now she was curious about the man behind the story. The rest of the flight went smoothly and Magnus kept reading, occasionally looking out the window. When the plane landed, he took his bag and guitar case, disembarking with a smile. Driving to his hometown, Magnus tapped his fingers on the steering wheel, enjoying the drive. He pulled into the Sunset Motel around midnight, hoping for a clean room. The air felt familiar and brought back memories. He checked in, dropped his bags, and fell asleep quickly, feeling surprisingly at ease. The next morning, yawning and with coffee in hand, Magnus headed to the hospital. His black hair was tied back, and his beard was still damp from a quick shower. At the front desk, he asked, "Which way to the elevators?" The blonde receptionist looked up, and to his surprise, he recognized her immediately. "Mary Lou?" "Yes, do I know you?" she replied. "It's me, Magnus Condon," he said with a warm smile. "Magnus? Oh my God, it is you!" she exclaimed, rushing to hug him. "I heard you got married." "I was. It didn't work out. That's too bad. Some of our classmates would love to see you now," Mary Lou said with a knowing smile. "Really?" Magnus said, amused. "Oh yeah, you turned out quite well," she said with a playful punch on his shoulder. "How long are you in town?" "Not sure," he said, scratching his cheek. "At least this week and maybe next, but nothing certain yet. You have to come over for dinner. Me and Scott would love to catch up." "Not Scott Parker, the guy who used to give us a hard time?" Magnus asked, surprised. "Yeah, he changed a lot after a knee injury in college," Mary Lou explained. "I was working as a volunteer back then. I'll tell you more over dinner." So can we? Sure. How about Saturday night? The Quarterstone? Mary Lou suggested, naming the fancy local steakhouse. Sounds good. I could use a nice steak, Magnus said with a grin. Perfect! I'll let Scott know and find a sitter for the kids, Mary Lou said quickly, scribbling down her number. Kids? Magnus said, surprised she still looked the same. Stop, you'll make me blush, Mary Lou said, clearly pleased with the compliment. Well, Scott's a lucky guy, Magnus teased. Oh, why's that? Mary Lou asked with a smile. You're as beautiful as ever, Magnus said, not trying to flirt but just being kind. Thank you, Mary Lou said, batting her eyelashes. So what brings you here? I came to see my grandmother. Got a call she had a fall, so I came in last night. Let me check, Mary Lou said, typing away. They just brought her breakfast, room 207. Got it, Magnus said, heading to the elevators. Hey, make sure to say goodbye before you leave today, Mary Lou called after him. As Magnus walked to the elevators, he passed an elegant woman in a sundress, followed closely by an older man. They didn't notice him, but their presence added a touch of southern charm to the morning. Magnus stepped into the elevator, heading toward his grandmother's room with mixed emotions, concern for her health, but warmth from reconnecting with an old friend. May waved gently at Mary Lou as they passed by. Calm down, Bill. Your brother will be here soon, May said as they walked to the elevator. She noticed a man in front of the metal doors holding a guitar case. She didn't like his long hair and beard. Why can't people dress nicely? She thought, frowning at his t-shirt and jeans. We'll stay until noon. Then your mom will take over, May said, wrapping her arm around her fiancé's. She looked at Magnus, trying to show she was better than him. Magnus ignored her. He smiled inside as his brother talked about him, not knowing Magnus was right there. If Bill can't spot me, I can walk past my parents without a problem, Magnus thought. He hummed as he stepped into the elevator, followed by his brother and his fiancée. His fingers tapped on his guitar case as a tune played in his head. Stop staring, Bill, May snapped. You don't want to mix with people like him. That's rude, Magnus thought. He wondered why his brother liked her. He must see something special in her to deal with her attitude. Magnus hid his smirk as the elevator dinged. He watched as May pulled Bill along. At least Bill isn't completely clueless. Magnus trailed a few steps behind them, grinning at the thought of May's reaction when she learned who he was. He stopped by room 205, giving them time to settle before going in. He couldn't wait to see the look on her face. He nodded to a male nurse and noticed a female doctor busy with a chart. It's okay, Edna. Magnus will be here soon. Why did you bring her? Magnus heard his grandma ask. He smiled, realizing she didn't like May either. Grandma, please don't start. May is just worried about you, Bill said, trying to defend his fiancée. Sure she is, Edna muttered. I am. I don't know why you always make a fuss about me, May said, sitting nicely in the chair across from Bill. Uh-huh, Edna replied, wanting to see her grandson. She couldn't understand why Bill wanted to marry May. Even though May had her own money, Edna knew it wasn't for that. Still, Edna wouldn't interfere, but wouldn't help when it all fell apart. Magnus ran his fingers through his beard. It was time to save his grandma. He grabbed his guitar case handle. Magnus walked across the shiny floor, his boots clanking with each step. May gasped when she saw the scruffy man at the door. Maggie! Edna shouted, surprised. Maggie, Maggie, come give me a hug! She hugged him tight, her cheek on his shoulder, and rubbed his back as he kissed her cheek. Edna looked at her grandson with love. You look good. I guess Hollywood has treated you well. It has, Magnus replied. Hollywood? Bill said, standing up quickly as Magnus moved to the foot of their grandmother's hospital bed. What are you doing in that place? He asked, not liking it. Magnus didn't answer, just shared a big smile with his grandmother. Bill, let's not judge too fast, May said, noticing his simple clothes. He must have moved across the country for work since he left the job your dad gave him, she said, sitting up straight to show her high-class upbringing. Magnus just made a dismissive sound. Show them, baby. I've been dying to see their faces, Edna said happily. Grandma, what do you mean? Did you know what Magnus has been doing? Bill asked, surprised. Of course I did, and lose that look before I smack it off your face, Edna said firmly. I think you'll want to see this, Magnus said, dropping a Music Insider magazine on his grandmother's lap. He brought it to show her that he had made it big. This is a joke, right? Bill asked, thinking it was fake and that Magnus couldn't admit he messed up by leaving the family business. No joke. Maggie is a real musician, Edna said, lovingly looking at the cover. Gran? Magnus rested his hands on the bed frame, his face heating up. Yes, dear, what is it? Edna said, setting the magazine down. She watched Bill leave the room quickly and saw El May trying to take the magazine. I want that back, Edna barked, stopping El May. After I've talked with my grandson, she said, waving her out of the room, and close the door. Now, Maggie, what did you want to say? Edna asked, resting her hands on her lap. You remember the song I made for Grandpa after he died? Magnus asked, seeing her smile. Of course I do. Your grandpa would have loved it, Edna said, nodding. Well, the band is putting it on our new album, Magnus said shyly. Edna gasped, covering her mouth as tears filled her eyes. Oh, Maggie, that's wonderful, Edna said, wiping a tear away. Paul would be so proud. Will you play it for me? Of course, Grandma, Magnus said, already planning to do that. Edna tilted her head at the sight of the new guitar. The red finish showed the wood grain. She found it odd that it had scroll shapes and no pickups like Paul had taught her about. It was too thin to be an acoustic like the one Paul had before he died, which made her giggle remembering his arm reaching around it. Maggie, where's Paul's guitar he gave you, and what kind is that? Edna asked. It's at home. It's too valuable to bring on an airplane, so I brought this one, Magnus said, patting the instrument. It's an acoustic electric. I'm ready, Edna nodded, settling into the mattress. Oh, baby, that was wonderful. Did you take singing lessons? She asked, teary-eyed, once Magnus finished the song. Yeah, Halima said if they were going to use the song, I better learn to sing, Magnus said, resting his arm on the guitar neck. Tell me about her, but first you owe me for the days you've been gone, Edna said, smiling. As you wish, Magnus bowed. He played songs he used to play for her on free evenings. I've missed that. If I could stand, I would have danced, Edna sighed. Now set that down and tell me about Halima and your other band members. Marge and Fergus hurried through the hospital lobby after Bill sent a group text. Marge held Fergus's arm, impatiently waiting for the elevator. She was eager to see her son and learn what he'd been up to since he left. El May, stop reading that gossip. There's no way Magnus is a musician, much less a rock star, Bill said bitterly, chewing his thumbnail and pacing. El May ignored him, her face burning as she read the article's last part. So scandalous, she whispered, her heart racing. She peeked over the magazine, watching Bill, realizing she might have chosen poorly if the article was true. I don't know. It looks real to me, she muttered, feeling a chill run down her spine. Her ears perked up as she heard laughter coming from the room. Bill? Marge marched towards her son. Where's your brother? She asked, her husband close behind. Sitting with Grandma, Bill said, pointing to the room. Marge stopped in front of El May as she saw her son's image on the magazine cover. Her jaw dropped, realizing her son had achieved something they had said was impossible. Now she understood where he had been. Why didn't he want to tell her? She had only tried to be a good mother, not to crush his dreams, but to be practical and show him the importance of a steady job over chasing an unlikely dream. I was still reading that, El May huffed as Marge took the magazine from her hands. Go buy another one, Marge said, pushing the door open. Her eyes fell on the man in the chair, laughing with Edna. She took in his long hair, the way his beard caught the light, and his piercing blue eyes that quickly hardened when he looked at her. Oh, you brought me my copy, Edna said, holding out her hand to her daughter-in-law. This is yours? Marge asked, confused. Maggie brought it for me, Edna nodded. I'm eager to read about his adventures. I see. Marge reluctantly handed it over. Just don't read the last part, Magnus said, speaking only to his grandmother as his parents stood across from him. Why? Were you a naughty boy? Edna asked, smirking. She saw Magnus blush, knowing it was true. She could tell from how he talked about Halima that he had feelings for her, though he wouldn't admit it. Edna hated how Iona had hurt him and made him closed off. She hoped Halima would be good for him. "Hello, son," Marge said, resting her hands on the bed. "Hello," Magnus said indifferently. "I see you've become a bum of sorts," Fergus sneered, his thinning black hair combed back, his suit snugly fitting his shoulders. His chest puffed out to show what he thought success looked like, not someone with long hair, a beard, and jeans. "I don't approve." "I don't care if you do or don't," Magnus said, rising from his seat, his eyes hard on his father. "How I look is none of your concern. What I do with my life is none of your concern. I worked my tail off in that dead-end job you left me in while you showered that." He pointed at Bill. "Arrogant guy with everything. Don't be petty because I no longer need you." Leaning down, he kissed his grandmother's cheek. "I have to go. I'll be back tomorrow," Magnus whispered in her ear. "Okay, sweetheart," Edna said, lightly patting his cheek. "You better bring that nice woman around sometime." She chuckled as Magnus blushed. "Yes, Grandma." "I'm not done talking to you," Fergus growled, grabbing Magnus's left arm. "And yet I'm done talking to you," Magnus said darkly. "Now take your hand off me or I'll break it." "Fergus, remove your hand from my grandson right this second," Edna barked. "I know I didn't raise you to be like this." "If your son doesn't want to talk to you, that's his right. You made your bed, now lie in it," she said, holding up the magazine, her finger tapping Magnus's picture. "When was the last time you were on a cover without paying for it?" Edna rubbed her sons' and daughter-in-law's faces in Magnus's fame. She had been waiting to do this all year, holding off until she could see her grandson again. "Mother, don't you mother me. Your father would be ashamed of how you treated your own son. I'm just glad Paul never saw this side of you. He would be disgusted and would have tanned your hide for being an idiot. Your son finally makes something of himself on his own, no thanks to you, and you berate him for it? The nerve?" Edna scolded, seeing the defeat in Fergus's face as he let go of Magnus's arm. "I'll see you later, baby," she said, blowing her grandson a kiss. "Wouldn't miss it, Grandma," Magnus said, smiling lovingly at her as he left the room. "Mother, must you say such things?" Magnus heard his father ask as he stopped by his brother. "Where are you going, Magnus?" Bill asked, glancing at his guitar case, remembering their youth. "Wherever I wish," Magnus said plainly. "Please," Elmay quickly stood up. "We got off on the wrong foot." "I'm Elmay," she said, holding out her hand. Magnus ignored it, turning his attention to his brother. "Move." "I can't do that, Magnus," Bill said, placing a hand on his brother's shoulder. He felt the muscles tense. "Not before we tell you about our wedding." "You think I'd come to that?" Magnus asked, arching an eyebrow. "Come on, man. Work with me. Who helped you find that lawyer? Who was there when you vented about Iona? Me, Magnus." "I was there," Bill said, trying to mend things. He knew he sometimes bragged about his success, but he wanted to show he cared now. Magnus was still there for him. "Please, you must come," Elmay pleaded. She wondered who his famous guest would be. "Maybe we could help you with your parents," she suggested. She also wanted to know if his stories were true. Elmay had been with other men before, but not Bill. She knew it might hurt her reputation and cost money since they knew the same people. "I'll pass on that," Magnus said, looking at her. "But I'll be there this time." "When is it?" he asked, wanting to settle his debt to his brother. After that, he'd only visit to see his grandmother. "Oh, excellent," Elmay clapped her hands. "March 6th of next year," Bill said. "I'll have to check if we're on tour then." "So you really are a rock star?" Bill asked, still not believing it. "Yeah, the magazine isn't enough proof for you." "It's not that, it's just surprising," Elmay said, smiling at him. Her eyes glanced at him, wondering about his beard. "Here," Magnus sighed, pulling out his phone. He showed them a video from the recording studio. "See, that's me," he said, then turned it off. "Well, wow," Bill muttered. "I'm happy for you, Magnus," he said, patting his brother's arm. Magnus wasn't sure if he believed him. He turned as he heard his mother behind him. "Please, Magnus, can we talk before you leave?" Marge asked. "We were wrong, and you were right. I miss my baby. Can we please work on this?" "Why?" Magnus asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because I'm your mother. It hurts knowing my son doesn't want to talk to me. I thought we were doing the right thing with Iona. We believed she loved you. 2 months after you left, we found out she was still seeing Connor. We kicked her out, but by then you had shut your phone off and your lawyer wouldn't give us your new number. The first month, I cried myself to sleep wondering if you were okay. Edna hinted you were, but you never called. A simple call would have been enough. I spent all this time worrying about you, Marge said, a tear on her eyelash. You've been taking care of yourself. Please, can we have a cup of coffee? Not Sunday dinner, just coffee. Is that too much to ask? Magnus thought about it. He heard his grandfather's words in his mind. Knowing his grandfather would be disappointed if he didn't give her a chance, he pulled out his phone and called his mother. That's my number, don't misuse it, Magnus said as he walked down the hall and heard his mother's phone ring. Tomorrow, 7 o'clock at Greg's, get a booth. If you're 1 minute late, I'll leave. I'll be there! You can count on it! Marge shouted, a joyful smile on her lips as she watched her son disappear. Hey! Mary Lou greeted Magnus as she waved. It seemed like a family reunion was about to happen, she chuckled, remembering how the Condon family came to the hospital. Yeah, how do those go again? Magnus asked, sliding his hand along the desk. A punch here, some words there, a crazy cousin running around. That bad, huh? Something like that, Magnus nodded. Well, maybe this will cheer you up. Scott's excited for Saturday night. He probably wants to see me in that nice black dress. You'd think he'd remember that's how we got our son, Mary Lou said, trying to cheer him up. I don't know, Mary. If it shows off more, no guy could keep his eyes off you, Magnus said, remembering her body image issues in high school. Magnus, please, Mary Lou gasped, hiding her face behind her hair. What? I'm sure Scott agrees he's the one who gets to take that dress off you, Magnus said, laughing as Mary Lou hit him lightly with the clipboard. You're embarrassing me, Mary Lou whispered. What? I'm just telling the truth. What was that guy's name you had a crush on in 10th grade? Chad something. White, Mary Lou offered. Yeah, him. I bet if he saw you now and if you were single, he'd say yes in 5 seconds. It's not nice to tease a girl like that, Mary Lou said, puffing out her cheeks. Then again, trust me, you wouldn't want him now, Magnus said, knowing how the man looked after seeing his Facebook page. Why's that? Let's just say he gained a lot of weight, while you look even better, Magnus said, flashing her a smile. I'll bet you'll turn some heads at the next high school reunion. You would too, mister, Mary Lou said, wagging her finger at him. You didn't have those muscles or that rugged face in high school? She giggled, feeling like they were back to their old times of playful teasing. 5 years under the hot sun will do that. Plus, these days I have a lot of time on my hands. Had to balance out my left arm with my right, if you know what I mean, Magnus said, winking at her, causing Mary Lou to burst out laughing. God, I've missed you, Magnus, Mary Lou said, wiping away her tears of laughter. Well, you've got my number. You should come up to Montana and visit. I've got plenty of room, Magnus said, resting his elbow on the desk with his chin in his hand. Is that where you're living now? Mary Lou asked, raising an eyebrow. There in L.A., when I'm not in the recording studio. The space in Montana helps me deal with what happened with Iona. So you did end up with her? For a while, Magnus nodded. Oh, I've got to hear more about this. What are you doing for lunch tomorrow? No plans. How about we meet up at Lauren's? I don't know if I can wait until Saturday to get more of this story, Mary Lou said, flashing him a bright smile. Sure, although... What? Mary Lou tilted her head, not liking his mischievous smirk. I wonder how Scott would feel about me stealing his wife away, Magnus teased her. Magnus Condon, you're terrible, Mary Lou said, pretending to be horrified, but her eyes twinkled with amusement. She knew he wouldn't try anything with her. Magnus respected her boundaries, and he wasn't that kind of man. Even if she had wondered what it would have been like if he had kissed her, she would never cross that line. Well, I should let you get back to work, she said. Don't be a stranger. You better call me at least once a day and text me a bunch, Mary Lou said, waving goodbye as he walked toward the automatic doors. Mary, who were you talking to? I haven't seen you this happy since Scott took you on a weekend trip, her co-worker asked. Oh, just an old friend I haven't seen in many years, Mary Lou said, looking up at her co-worker who liked to wear dark eyeliner. Me and Magnus Condon used to go to school together. Magnus Condon from Straza Smrti? Eden asked, eyes wide. She quickly opened a web browser and typed in the band's name. Him! Is that the Magnus you're talking about? Eden asked, pointing at a video of Magnus's first show. Oh my God, that's Magnus. I always knew he could play. I never knew he joined a band, Mary Lou said, sitting back in her chair. Eden dropped to her knees. Please, please, introduce me. I love that band, Eden begged. All right, no need to beg, Mary Lou chuckled, pulling out her phone and quickly dialing Magnus's number. Come on, I've been gone for like 2 minutes. You can't already miss me, Magnus teased. No, you big goof. Have you left yet? No, I'm not even halfway to my rental car yet, Magnus said, rolling his eyes. Could you wait there? A co-worker of mine wants to meet you, Mary Lou said, wondering if this would always happen now that she knew a star. Only if you bring me some of your cookies tomorrow. You remembered? Of course I do. No one forgets something that good, ever, Magnus said, laughing. Deal, Mary Lou said, smiling. Come on, he's still in the parking lot, she said, pushing herself up. They found Magnus quickly as he was walking up the sidewalk. Oh my God, it is him, Eden said, gasping and holding Mary Lou's arm. So finally decided to take me up on my offer, Magnus teased, setting his guitar case down. Magnus, you're impossible, Mary Lou said, blushing. I know, and that's what you love about me, Magnus said, flashing her a teasing smile. So is this the person that— Hi, I'm Eden, she said, stepping forward and holding out her hand. Hello, Magnus said politely, shaking her hand. Eden has been working with me for the past 2 years. You could have told me you got famous, Mary Lou said accusingly. I was going to when we had dinner on Saturday, Magnus shot back. So have you been keeping this troublemaker out of trouble? He asked, chuckling as Mary Lou huffed. Well, I never, Mary Lou said, pretending to be offended. Oh, Mary is a delight, I assure you, Eden said, wondering if their banter was always like this. Oh, I know. I could tell you some stories, Magnus said, smiling as Mary Lou gasped. You wouldn't? Mary Lou asked, clearly embarrassed. I might if those cookies aren't good, Magnus said with a grin. You're an evil man, Magnus Condon, Mary Lou said, shaking her finger at him. Thank my soon-to-be ex-wife for that, Magnus said, turning to Eden. So, what can I do for you? Could you sign my top? Eden asked, pulling out a marker. Sure, can you hold this for a second? Magnus asked Mary Lou. Sure, I don't mind, Mary Lou replied. She watched as Eden stretched her scrub top tight while Magnus signed his name on it. Eden looked at him with admiration, and Mary Lou wondered if this was what his life was like now. Oh, thank you, Eden said, holding Magnus's hands. I'm so glad the band didn't break up after Bobby's death, she said, stepping closer to him. Yeah, they're still upset about it, Magnus said, wondering why she was getting so close. If you ever come back to town, please see me. I'll do anything you want. Eden? Mary Lou gasped. What? Haven't you ever wanted to be with a rock star? Eden said, rubbing Magnus's hands along her chest. I'm a happily married woman, Mary Lou said, though the thought had crossed her mind. I have to go. You ladies have lives to save, Magnus said, feeling uncomfortable. Please, keep me in your thoughts, Eden said with a mischievous smile, before Mary Lou pulled her away. What's gotten into you? I'll see you tomorrow, Magnus, Mary Lou said, glancing at him. Marge sat in a booth at Greg's, looking out at the parking lot as she waited for her son. She arrived 10 minutes early, knowing Magnus would leave if she was late. This was her chance to fix things with him. Her husband Fergus was too proud to see that yelling at Magnus only pushed him away. Marge couldn't bear not seeing or talking to her son again. 10 months of worry and silence had been too much. Ma'am, can I get you something? The waitress asked, holding a ticket book and pen. Could you wait? My son should be here soon, Marge said pleadingly. You have to order something. Coffee is a good choice, the waitress said with a wink. Then the boss can't complain. Then I'll have a cup of coffee, Marge said, smiling. Thank you. Not a problem, hun, the waitress said, tucking the ticket book into her apron. I remember when my son left town. I was on pins and needles until he came home, she said, patting Marge's shoulder. Marge wrapped her hands around the warm mug as the minutes ticked by. Her eyes stayed on the parking lot. She glanced at the clock, seeing only 3 minutes left. She sat straighter when she saw headlights pull in. Her heart raced, hoping it was Magnus. She smiled as she saw him step out of the car and walk to the door. The bell jingled as Magnus entered. She wanted to give him a hug, but knew he might leave if she did. So she smiled warmly as he came closer. Thanks for coming, Magnus, Marge said and gestured to the seat across from her. You have until I finish eating to speak, Magnus said, waving at the waitress. I get it, Marge said, seeing this as her moment. How have you been? Where are you living now? Fine. Actually, not fine. I've dealt with a cheating wife and parents who took her side, Magnus said, watching his mother flinch. A divorce I never wanted. I hate what Iona did to me. I hate feeling this way. Oh dear, I'm so sorry. We thought we were doing the right thing, trying to save it. Iona tricked us all. When I found out she was still seeing that man, I got so angry, she ran out like a scared cat. When she came back to get her things, she hid in that man's car while your father stood there, angry, as young men loaded up the moving truck. I know we've done things I'm ashamed of now, Marge said, placing her hand over his. So he came. That's great, the waitress said to Marge with a friendly smile. So what can I get you? 2 eggs over easy, white toast, bacon, orange juice, and coffee, Magnus said quickly. And you, hun? I'll have the same and a refill, Marge said, holding up her cup. Sure thing. I'll get that for you, the waitress said, smiling. You didn't answer my second question, Marge said, her hand still on his. 20 minutes south of Helena, Montana, Magnus said. When I'm not in L.A.? Oh, why Montana? Do you live in an apartment or... Her eyes followed the waitress as she brought their drinks. I have a 100-acre plot with a big house, bought it cheap, Magnus said, adding creamer and sugar to his coffee. Why, you really want to know? He asked, raising an eyebrow as he sipped his coffee. Yes, even if it hurts, Marge nodded. Wanted to be far from you all in Iona without paying a lot in taxes, Magnus said, putting his coffee down. Oh, but it's really cold, isn't it? Marge asked, looking down. Yeah, it's already chilly when it's still warm here, Magnus nodded. I got winter clothes ready. A kind salesgirl helped me choose all I need for my first winter. So, do you have someone new in your life? Marge asked, looking back up. No, not now. I'm trying to work on myself. Trying to figure out why Iona cheated. Why she hurt me. I only kept that job so she could stay in school. I worked hard to make sure she had everything. Still, it wasn't enough. I know, darling. You don't know how proud I was that you were a good husband. That you didn't complain when your father gave you that job while babying Bill. Sometimes I wonder what he's thinking, Marge sighed. It took strength to work long hours and still do everything Iona wanted. I know you didn't always want to go to her work events after a long shift, but you did it to make her happy. I'm sorry I took so long to see her true colors. She moved her arm as the waitress put their plates down. So, how did you get into a band? I sent an audition tape when I got out of jail, Magnus said, breaking the egg yolk with his toast. And how was it? Being on the road, I mean. Did you stay out of trouble? Marge asked, biting her bacon. No, I didn't get into trouble. Not that there wasn't a lot happening backstage, but I usually went back to the bus after a show. Being on the road was fun. Brandon and George helped a lot. Halima was with me every step when I met the band's agent. So I don't have to worry about a young girl showing up with a child claiming to be yours? Marge asked with a smirk, making Magnus choke on his food. That's not funny, Magnus said, turning red. Well, how would I know? You haven't called in 10 months. Who knows what kids are out there? Marge teased. I don't do that, okay? Magnus whispered. Oh? No fans chasing you around? No, that does happen, Magnus admitted. Yet you don't get involved? No. So if you aren't chasing or being chased, are you seeing anyone? Marge asked. But her son kept quiet, so she didn't push it. Soon their meal was over, and she knew he would leave. Please, just a bit more, she begged, lightly squeezing his hand. All right, until I finish my coffee, Magnus said, waving for a refill, later that day. So what's the story with Iona? Mary Lou asked, waiting for their food. Oh, Scott says hi. Funny, I thought he didn't know my name, Magnus chuckled. Only after some pushing, Mary Lou smirked. So spill the beans, don't skip anything, she said, patting his hand. Caught her cheating with her boss over a year ago? Oh no, I can't believe it. She was crazy about you in high school, Mary Lou said, shocked. I thought so too, Magnus agreed. What changed? Mary Lou asked, holding his hand as she saw the pain in his eyes. Beats me, Magnus said bitterly. One day she just stopped talking to me and began working late. The last time we were together was after a Halloween party she dragged me to. I had just finished a long shift and was really tired. Looking back, it seemed like she was trying to help. "That's not right," Mary Lou said, her voice getting louder with anger. "Tell me about it." When I tried to start something, she would say she was too tired or not in the mood. After a week, I asked why she didn't want to be close to me anymore. We used to be together at least once a day, sometimes more if we had time. After 6 years, she just stopped, and I didn't think it was because she was cheating. Weeks went by and Thanksgiving came. We still hadn't been close, and it made me mad. We argued before going to my parents' house. That was one cold holiday. After a few days of giving each other the silent treatment, I tried to make peace, but she wouldn't listen. Then I said, "If you're not going to be my wife, you can sleep on the couch. I'm not sharing my bed with a stranger," Magnus said, taking a sip of his iced tea. "What happened then?" "She looked at me like she felt sorry for me, like I was worth nothing," Magnus said, waving his hands. "Like you were worth nothing?" Mary Lou asked, confused. "Did she not understand what marriage is?" "Apparently not," Magnus said, rolling his eyes. "She grabbed her bag and left. I don't know when she came back. When I woke up, she was snoring on the couch, telling me to be quiet because her head hurt. I told her if she didn't like it, she could leave. She told me not to be mean and to give her an hour. I wasn't quiet and slammed the front door when I left for work. Looking back, I see all the signs. I was just mad she walked out and stayed out until who knows when. That was a week before Christmas. I wish I had known then. I would have saved a lot of money on gifts." "I'd say so. Did she get you anything?" Mary Lou asked, feeling sorry for him. She couldn't imagine Scott cheating on her. She trusted him completely and knew he would never do that. "Nope. So I returned all the gifts I got her. You should have seen her face when she realized I wasn't wasting money on her. Then she asked me something strange." "Oh? What did she ask?" Mary Lou asked, as the waiter brought her salad and his country-fried steak. The smell made her mouth water, but she needed to watch her calories. What I thought about open marriages. "What?" Mary Lou dropped her fork in shock. "Close your mouth, or you'll catch flies," Magnus said with a smile. "I told her there's no point in being married if you're with other people. I'm a one-woman kind of guy. If I'm with you, I'm with you." Iona shut up after that. She didn't like it when I asked how she'd feel if she came home to find me with someone else. And trust me, I know the looks I got before I left town. "I could have been with other women if I wanted," Magnus said, seeing Mary Lou nod as she ate her salad. So she was okay with cheating, but the thought of you doing the same made her mad? Exactly. She thought no woman would want me and all men fell at her feet. Whoever put that idea in her head did me a favor. If that guy hadn't talked his way into her bed, I wouldn't know her true colors, Magnus said, enjoying his steak. "Let me ask. Tell me to shut up if it's too personal, but when you did have sex, how was it?" Mary Lou asked, curious. "If you're asking if it was bad, it wasn't. I knew how to make her happy. Sex wasn't the issue." "But we can fake it," Mary Lou said, hoping he knew she wasn't defending Iona. "Yeah, I know, but she wasn't faking." "You don't leave that kind of wet spot if you're faking," Magnus said with a grin, making Mary Lou blush. "And I knew when she was faking. I called her out on it many times. That was in the early years when we first started having sex." "How could you tell?" "Her right eye twitches when she's lying. It's subtle. If you don't know what to look for, you wouldn't see it." After weeks of fighting, hoping we could work things out because I enjoyed being married to her, or at least the woman I thought she was, I bought us dinner and went to her work. That's where I found them. And trust me, she was definitely faking with that man. So I kicked her out, found a great lawyer, quit my job, told my parents to back off, went to jail for 30 days because I didn't want to waste another second on a liar. Then I sent in my audition tape after I got out and left town. Spent the next few months on the road, then flying back and forth between my home in Montana and L.A. But by tomorrow night, I'll finally be rid of Iona for good. "Why?" "She's finally agreed to sign the papers." "Damn. Well, I'm not glad you're hurting, but I'm glad you found out the truth about her before you spent 20 or so years on her," Mary Lou said, comforting her friend. "Me too," Magnus nodded. "So now the most important question, are you seeing anyone now?" she asked, raising an eyebrow when Magnus burst out laughing. "What's so funny?" "My mother asked me the same question," Magnus said, laughing hard. "And did you answer her?" "No." "But you'll answer mine, right?" Mary Lou asked, pointing her fork at him. Yeah, there is someone I have my eye on, Magnus said, explaining his first meeting with Halima and how she made him feel over the months they were on the road together. Then why haven't you asked her out yet? She doesn't date married men, her words. Is that another reason you're so happy about tomorrow? Mary Lou asked, pushing aside her empty plate. I'm happy for you, that you can find someone that makes you feel good after what Iona did to you, she said, once Magnus nodded. Now if you and this Halima get married, I better get an invite. Counting all your chickens before they hatch, aren't you? Magnus said, though he liked the sound of that. He didn't want to jinx it. Nope, shaking her head, smiling wide at Magnus. I know you, Magnus. You're the kind of guy that most real women, not cheaters, want, Mary Lou said, squeezing his hand. And if she can't see that, then send her to me and I'll sort her out. Aw, my hero, Magnus joked. And don't you forget it, Mary Lou smiled, finishing her water. Enough about my love life. Let's talk about yours. Magnus grinned as Mary Lou nearly choked on her drink. Oh, poor Scott, does he know you don't, well, you know. Magnus! Mary Lou almost yelled, pressing her hand against her forehead, shaking her head, blushing. Magnus laughed. I don't know why I'm still your friend. Because I know all your secrets, Magnus teased. I love this. We have to do lunch or dinner at my place before you leave, Mary Lou said, hugging him tightly. Sure, I'd love to see how your kids turned out, if they got weird tentacles. Magnus's laughter echoed as Mary Lou lightly hit his chest. Take care, Mary Lou, he said, hugging her again. It'll be okay, Magnus. Call me if you need to talk, all right? Mary Lou said, rubbing his back gently. Count on it. I have to get back before my hour is up, Mary Lou said, stepping back. See you Saturday night, Magnus said, waving with a smile. As Mary Lou got into her car, she pulled out her phone. Honey? Yeah? How was lunch? Scott asked, sitting at his desk at the bank. How would you feel about helping me track down and handle something? For you, babe, sure, let's handle it. God, I love you, Mary Lou said, starting her car. So, are you going to tell me why we're doing this? I will, once we're home and not on the phone, Mary Lou said, backing out of her parking spot. That bad, huh? Very. Thursday, 2 p.m. Magnus sat across from his wife, counting the minutes until he would be free from Iona. Their lawyers had left to give them privacy. He didn't know why. It wasn't like they were going to fight. He felt tense at the thought. Glancing at the clock, Iona hadn't spoken in the past 5 minutes. He didn't care if it was an hour of silence. Not having to listen to her was enough. His eyes traced her light red hair. Her light brown eyes stared unblinkingly at him. He noticed she had put on a few pounds. Her suit jacket was tight around her chest when it used to be a bit loose. Magnus could tell she was trying to use her looks to sway him, with her blouse unbuttoned enough to show some cleavage. I've been trying to figure out a way to tell you why I did what I did, Iona finally spoke. Uh-huh. You look good, Magnus, Iona said, her eyes running over his face and chest. She liked his new look. You know there's still time to stop this. I can still be your wife, and I'll swear I'll never— No, Magnus interrupted. I had to try, Iona sighed. I had to see if you truly hated me like that article said. She looked defeated. I do. Did it take just that to make you realize you're nothing but a cheater? Iona finished. Yes, I acted like that. I got caught up in it all. Thought I could do better. Thought I could have a better life. I thought you weren't going anywhere, and if I stayed with you, you would just drag me down. You do realize I stayed in that lousy job, working long hours for you, right? I supported you so you didn't have to worry about working while you were in school. Did you even think about what I gave up so you could get your degree? No, you only thought about yourself. Did you even love me? Magnus asked, watching Iona sink into her seat. Of course I did. I still do. I got blinded by Connor's words and my own selfishness. By the end, I didn't recognize myself. It wasn't until I heard your angry voicemail that I realized how badly I messed up, Iona said, trying to sound sincere. She didn't know Magnus had kept tabs on her and knew she was still seeing Connor. She thought she could sweet-talk Magnus into accepting her and pass off her unborn child as his. She hoped to stay married long enough to get his money and child support before a DNA test could be done. Magnus, please believe me. I never meant for this to happen. I never wanted to hurt you, and I know I did. I hurt you so much. Don't call me that. I'm not your husband anymore. Okay, Magnus. Can't you meet me halfway? I'm willing to try again if you are. Imagine how exciting it would be with our lawyers outside while we get close on this desk. Let me make it up to you, Iona said, feeling excited at the thought of being with him again. Unlike Connor, Magnus always cared about her feelings. The idea of being with Magnus again made her knees weak. And just like that, Magnus snapped his fingers. All is forgiven. Of course not. I know it will take time to earn your trust again. I'm willing to put in the time if you give us another chance. But you didn't care about our marriage when you cheated on me. Like I said, Magnus, I was stupid and blinded. I thought I could do better than you, but now I see I already had the best thing. You mean now that I'm famous, I'm good enough for you? Is that it? Magnus asked, narrowing his eyes. No, you're twisting my words, Iona said, shaking her head. She knew she had to be careful with her words to get back into his life and his money. It's great you followed your dream. I know how much you wanted to live off your music, Iona said, trying to charm him. She hoped to sway him just enough to get back in his life. I regret risking the best thing in my life, Iona began as she watched Magnus check his phone, not liking the smirk on his face. Magnus, I know you've been with that reporter. Like you haven't been with Connor? Magnus retorted, hiding his smirk. He knew about her affair. You left, Magnus. You threw me out of our home. And I was supposed to share my bed with a cheater? I made mistakes, but I'm not a bad person, Iona said, raising her voice. And that was months after I left you. You didn't wait a day to be with your lover. And I'm supposed to believe you didn't sleep with anyone while you were traveling? Iona snapped back, her anger showing. She thought Magnus had been missing her, but when a reporter showed up asking about him, she knew she had to talk to him. She hated reading about all the women who wanted to be with him. Look, I'm ready to move past all that. I can't ask you to be faithful when I wasn't. I just want my husband back. I want to show you how sorry I am. No, you don't get to decide anymore. I put up with a lot because I loved you, Magnus said, standing up. He was done with the lies. You killed any love I had when I saw you with him. Blame yourself. I asked you many times to stop working so much to be with me, but you wouldn't. You never cared enough then to save our marriage, and I don't care enough now. The thought of being near you, much less sharing my bed, is awful, Magnus said. He didn't care if his words hurt her. She had broken his heart, and he wanted her to feel the same pain. But Magnus! Iona nearly shouted, quickly standing up. But nothing. You wasted your chance with me. You threw away everything I was willing to do for you. All for what? A fling with a middle-aged lawyer? Magnus shook his head and walked toward the door. I hope it was worth it. Worth ruining 2 marriages and 4 lives because you weren't happy. You didn't have the guts to leave me before doing this. No, you thought you could fool me. How stupid do you think I am? Did you honestly think this would work out for you? He opened the door, startling the 2 lawyers talking outside. This is the end of us. This is where I finally get you out of my life and start fresh, Magnus said, turning to his lawyer. Let's finish this, he said, hearing Iona cry behind him. Please, Magnus, think about this. Don't make me sign this. It's not too late, Iona pleaded, tears in her eyes. Sign the papers, Iona. Don't act like you're upset about this, Magnus said, annoyed by her stalling. Okay, Magnus, Iona sniffed after her lawyer whispered in her ear. I'm truly sorry it had to end like this. No, you're not. You haven't been sorry for anything you've done, Magnus said, quickly signing his name before handing the paperwork to his lawyer. Shaking Dan's hand once everything was in order, he said, With that, I am officially divorced from you. Go live your life because I honestly don't care, and walked out, waving goodbye over his shoulder. Ugh! 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 Iona screamed as she sat in her car. She hit her steering wheel, her hair flying as she vented her anger. Darn it, Magnus! You were supposed to come back to me! Now I have to go back to that man! She screamed again, knowing how her life would go now that Magnus had left her. She wasn't about to raise this child alone, so that meant only one thing, later that day. Hello? Magnus answered his phone as he sat on his bed. His guitar rested against his chest as he practiced songs for his new album. Hey, how did it go? Halima asked from her apartment in L.A. Well, I'm not married anymore, so there's that, Magnus said with a big smile. You wouldn't believe what she tried to do. Oh, what did she try? Halima asked, curling her legs beneath her on the couch. She had the nerve to think she could just lie her way back into my life, Magnus said, telling her everything that had happened in the conference room. She sounds lovely, Halima said sarcastically, feeling both upset at Iona's nerve and pleased that Magnus was free. Did you like being married? Honestly, yeah, I kind of did. Maybe the next time you do it, it will last, Halima said shyly, her cheeks heating. She glanced at the bags she had packed last night, knowing she had 11 hours before her flight. While she wanted to fly there immediately and hug Magnus, she thought she would give him a day before telling him they were dating. One can hope. The question is, who will the lucky woman be? Magnus said, hearing the smile in his voice as he set his guitar aside. I don't know. Maybe, she said softly. You'll meet this person soon, Halima said, biting her lip. I don't know. She has to be very pretty and have a sweet voice, Magnus said, hoping she was getting the hint. I see. What else does this woman need to sweep you off your feet? Halima asked, feeling her face heat up. She has to have flowing black hair, stunning brown eyes, soft lips, and a smile that could light up the sky. She should have long, smooth, shapely legs and a nice, tight little... Can I say it? Yeah, say it, Halima giggled, feeling her heart race. This tight little shape that makes a man's mouth water at the thought of just holding it. I hope there's a woman like that out there, Halima said, touching the locket with her mother's picture. She had told her parents about Magnus, minus his issues with his now ex-wife. Her father often teased her about falling for a Southern gentleman. He had often joked about seeing what this man's intentions were with his little girl. Halima wondered if Magnus would want to meet her family. She hoped he would. Family was everything to her. It was why Bobby's death hurt so much. Even though they were not together anymore, he was still family to her. One can only hope, Magnus said, lying on the bed. His hand moved up and down his chest as he looked at the ceiling. What hotel are you staying at? Halima asked. The Sunset Motel, room 213. Why? Magnus asked, his heart beating fast. I was just curious, Halima said, trying to sound relaxed. She felt nervous, hoping Magnus would be glad to see her in the morning. Well, I have a big dinner at my parents' house in a few hours. Can we talk tomorrow? Okay, have fun. You know I love hearing your voice, Magnus said, wondering if she was blushing. Magnus, if you keep talking like that, I might fall for you, Halima said softly. Then I guess I need to try harder. I must be out of practice, Magnus chuckled, hearing her quick breathing over the phone. I have to go. Magnus smiled at her flustered voice. Go ahead. I look forward to tomorrow, Magnus said, his fingers tapping his chest, a big smile on his face. If only you knew, Halima said, looking at her phone, bouncing on her couch with excitement. She bit her nail, thinking about her early morning flight. She didn't want to miss it. Friday, 11 a.m. Magnus had just showered and changed into fresh clothes before visiting his grandmother. He smiled, thinking about his phone call with Halima yesterday. He hoped her flirting might lead to something more. Now that he was free from his unfaithful wife, Magnus was ready to move on. A knock on his motel room door interrupted his thoughts. Yes? His breath caught as Halima stood in the doorway. Her white and red skirt swayed gently in the breeze. Her white linen top hinted at her caramel skin. Her 2 black suitcases were by her side, and her red flats matched her skirt. Her dark hair framed her soft cheeks. Hello, Magnus, Halima said softly with a warm smile. Can I come in? Of course, Magnus said, snapping out of his daze. He opened the door, stepping aside as her flowery scent filled the air. What are you doing here? Are you not happy to see me? Halima asked, looking over her shoulder as she set her bags on his bed, giggling at his red face. No, I am. You just surprised me, Magnus said, closing the door. So where are you staying? Isn't it obvious? Halima replied with a playful smile. Here, Magnus stammered. Halima nodded. She moved closer to him, her fingers trailing along her bag. Her hands ran up his chest as she looked into his eyes. Her hair hung down to her lower back. She bit her lower lip, feeling his hands on her hips. You don't mind, do you? Nope, not at all, Magnus said, feeling the warmth of her body as they stood close. Good. You should always share your bed with your girlfriend, Halima said, running her hands up his neck, her fingers in his hair. Her lips moved closer to his, her heart pounding. When their lips touched, it felt like sparks raced up her spine. So, girlfriend, huh? Magnus muttered when Halima pulled away. Don't pretend you haven't been checking me out, Halima said with a twinkle in her eye and a smile. Can you blame me? You're beautiful. I'd have to be crazy not to notice, Magnus said, holding her close as her arms slipped around his neck. Oh, go on, Halima cooed, enjoying his compliments. Her cheeks reddened as Magnus listed all the things he liked about her. She couldn't help but kiss him again. It felt right with him, something she had never felt before. She wanted to know why. So are we going to stand here all day? Not that I mind, Halima said shyly. Well, I was about to go to the hospital to see my grandmother when you showed up, Magnus said. Oh, then let's go, Halima said, taking his hand. She wants to meet you, Magnus said, feeling nervous. I'd love to meet her. And I want you to meet my parents, Halima said, leading him down the walkway as the door closed behind them. Magnus felt light on his feet as he watched Halima's hair lift in the breeze. Her eyes sparkled as she looked back at him, and her smile warmed his heart. She held his hand as they walked down the concrete path. Magnus, what are you doing? Halima asked as he opened the trunk of his car. She tilted her head, curious, as he pulled out his guitar case. Well, since I can't play for her at sunset, I have to do it now, Magnus said simply. You play for her? Halima asked. Ever since Grandpa died, I've taken up the habit of playing for her at sunset like he always did. That was until I moved away, Magnus explained. That's so sweet, Halima sighed, resting her head on his shoulder as they walked into the hospital. Mary Lou was working the front desk again. When she saw Magnus, a joyful smile appeared on her face. Her eyes then flicked to the woman on his arm, curious. The woman looked to be around Magnus's age, maybe a year younger. It was good to see him smile like that. Hello, Magnus, Mary Lou said, rising from her seat. If I didn't know better, I'd say you were following me. Well, if you'd give me the recipe for those cookies, I wouldn't have to camp out in your backyard, Magnus joked, hugging his best friend over the desk. Magnus? Halima said, feeling a twinge of jealousy. Right, introductions. Mary Lou, this is Halima. Halima, this is Mary Lou. Oh, so you're the Halima Magnus talks so highly of? Mary Lou said, smiling warmly at Halima. Knowing Magnus, he probably hasn't told you about me. We used to be best friends before I went to college. If you ever want to know any secrets about him, come to me. I know all the stories from when he was a kid, she said, shaking Halima's hand. Mary Lou saw that Halima looked relieved. Don't worry, there was a time I might have liked him, but that was long ago. But don't hurt my friend, Mary Lou warned. Trust me, after all he's been through, I wouldn't even think of it, Halima replied, happy Magnus had someone looking out for him. We should have coffee sometime. I'd love to hear about his crazy younger days. Be careful what you wish for, Magnus said with a playful smile. Don't listen to him. I'd love to chat. You're coming to dinner with us tomorrow night, right? Mary Lou asked. I just got here, but I thought Magnus would have told me about it, Halima said, playfully nudging Magnus. You make it hard to think straight, Magnus said, looking shy. I haven't seen that look in years, Mary Lou laughed. Nice to see it again. By the way, your parents are visiting, she said, gently touching Magnus's arm. It was bound to happen, Magnus shrugged. Still not talking to them? Halima asked. Magnus made a so-so gesture with his hand. Halima knew that if their relationship lasted, she'd want his parents to know their future kids. She thought she might be able to help them get closer slowly. It was nice meeting you, Mary Lou. I look forward to tomorrow night, she said warmly. Glad to meet you, too. I'll have to keep my husband Scott from talking too much, Mary Lou laughed. He's my husband, by the way. Yeah, Mary Lou here got lucky and married the high school football star. I still don't know why. Maybe she lost a bet, Magnus teased, as Mary Lou playfully hit his arm. What happened to your hand? He asked, noticing the cuts. Oh, Mary Lou blushed, thinking about the fight with Iona. I kind of got into a fight with Iona. Really? Magnus asked, trying not to laugh. Why didn't you tell me? I would have brought popcorn. It just happened. I went to tell her off and things got out of hand. I'll remember that, Halima said, giggling. Forget it. I don't want to talk about Magnus when he's like that, Mary Lou said, patting his shoulder. Hey now, Magnus pouted. If you don't want teasing, don't come to my work, Mary Lou said, putting her hands on her hips. Now I need to get back to work and you have someone to meet. Trust me, you'll love Edna. She's wonderful. Just a warning, though, she'll look you over since Magnus is her favorite grandson. Thanks for the heads up. I'll make sure to impress, Halima said, gently squeezing Magnus's arm. Now she's the kind of woman you need, Mary Lou said, nodding approvingly. Okay, Mom, Magnus said with an eye roll. You better come say goodbye before you leave, Mary Lou called after them. Of course, Mary. So a double date for our first date? Halima whispered as they waited for the elevator. Yeah, sorry about that. I meant to tell you, but that kiss surprised me, Magnus said, rubbing the back of his head. Oh? Well, then I'll have to do it more often, Halima said, snuggling up to him as the elevator doors opened. Mom, why won't you move in with me? We have enough room. For the last time, Fergus, I won't leave my home, Edna said firmly, her voice echoing in the hall. Please, Edna, Fergus is just worried about you. What if Mary Lou hadn't arrived when she did? Marge said, trying to convince her. At least until you get better. Fine, Edna sighed, but only until I'm well again. You ready to meet my family? Magnus whispered, waiting for them to finish. Halima nodded. I'm ready. I won't leave you, she said, gently squeezing his arm. Edna was the first to see her grandson. Her face lit up with a loving smile when she saw Halima. Hi, Maggie, she called out, making Magnus groan and Halima giggle at the nickname. Come in, Edna welcomed them. Magnus. Marge stood up quickly with a pleased smile. How have you been? I wanted to call, but I respected your wishes, she said, clasping her hands. And who is this lovely lady? Yes, we must know, Edna nodded. It's okay, Maggie, Halima whispered into his ear, kissing his cheek. Now you guys get out, Edna said, shooing her son and grandson away. So your mom says you live in Montana now, Fergus said, trying to start a conversation after a few quiet minutes. Yeah, Magnus muttered, fiddling with the latch on his case. Do you ever think about coming back home? I come back when I can. I just don't see you, Magnus said truthfully. I see, Fergus mumbled. He remembered the times he and Magnus would play together. When had he become so strict with his son? He just wanted the best for him, like his own father had wanted for him. That woman with you, she's quite lovely. Who is she? Fergus asked, noticing his son's cheeks turn red. Oh, it's like that, Fergus said, smiling. Her name's Halima. She's the lead singer of the band, Magnus replied. Oh? Is it anything I might have heard before? Not unless you listen to death metal, Magnus said, giving his father a look. Death metal? What's that? Fergus asked, confused. He preferred country music. Grandma would call it noise, but that's what I got signed to play, Magnus said, shrugging. Yeah, you always played the blues. Fergus wiped away a tear. Your love for music comes from your grandfather. Magnus sighed. What? It's just good music. I know, son. I just thought you'd always play it, Fergus replied, thinking about an article he read that painted him unkindly. The people behind it are good, too. I didn't think I'd enjoy it, but I do, Magnus admitted. A real man can admit when he's wrong, Fergus nodded. I've always wanted the best for you, like my dad did for me. That's why I was so hard on you. I should have seen your talent as a gift, not just a hobby. Fergus continued. I started you at the bottom of the company because I knew you could handle it. Your brother is great, but he sometimes acts without thinking. Running a business takes careful thought. If you mess up, people can suffer and money can be lost. That's why you always got a full paycheck, even when the site you worked on had problems. People needed to see what kind of man you are. Maybe I kept you there too long. For that, I'm sorry. Promotions are tough in our field. I had to choose the best person. Now, seeing all you've done, I realize I was wrong to push my way of life on you. I am so proud of you. I don't always like how you talk to me or your mom, but that's our fault, not yours. I want the best for you, son. Every father does. Your mom was right. My father would have punished me. But you didn't see how hurt your mom was when you left. You didn't call and it broke her heart. She won't tell you, but I saw it every day. It hurt me too. I'm not bringing up the past, Fergus said, raising his hands, just stating the facts. I'm not trying to argue, he added, noticing his son was really listening. That's why I was so angry the other day. You didn't see her cry when you left. Would you be happy with someone who hurt Iona before you knew the truth? No, I wouldn't, Magnus admitted. So you see where I'm coming from. Yeah, Magnus said, scratching his cheek and looking away. Magnus watched the door to his grandmother's hospital room slowly open. Magnus, his mom, Marge, called softly from the doorway, smiling warmly at him. She was impressed with Halima, especially with how she spoke about Magnus during their questions. It gave Marge hope that Halima could heal the hurt Iona caused. Won't you join us? Your grandmother would love to hear you play, Marge said, noticing her husband stand up. Do you still know that Lonnie Mack song? Fergus asked as his son got to his feet. Yeah, why? Magnus asked, his guitar case bumping his leg. I think it would be a good song for that little lady, Fergus said, placing his hand gently on his son's back as they entered the room. Magnus, you better keep this woman around, Edna said from her bed as Magnus entered. She's a keeper. She patted Halima's hand, making her blush. Thank you. That means a lot to me, Halima said. She really liked Edna, even if they had met only a short time ago. She understood Marge's side, too, trying to help Magnus save his marriage. Halima realized that from Magnus's view, it seemed like they were siding with Iona, but in reality, they were just trying to help him in their own way. They had known Iona for so long that she felt like a daughter to them, and they didn't want to lose her. They never thought Magnus would cut them off entirely for their choices. If you can make Magnus smile like this, you're always welcome in my home, Edna said, watching her grandson blush. Isn't he just adorable? She whispered to Halima, who nodded. Thank you, dear, Marge said, looking up at her husband as he guided her to a chair. Her hand slipped into his as he stood beside her, watching as Magnus set his case on the table. Now come and play for me, Edna said, ignoring the slight pain in her hip as she moved in bed. She smirked when Halima quickly got to her feet as Magnus strummed the intro to a song. Her heart lifted as Halima danced around. So he has his own dancer now, she thought to herself. Her eyes got a little teary as she watched them, thinking about her younger years with her late husband, Paul. She looked down as Marge gently squeezed her left hand, brushing her thumb along Marge's fingers. Yeah. Magnus began to sing the intro to I Found a Love by Lonnie Mack. Marge was surprised by the sound of her son's voice. Her eyes watched as Halima's hands were folded, covering her nose and mouth as Magnus's fingers moved over the neck of his guitar. I found a love, I found a love, I found a love that I feel. Whoa, yeah. Marge looked up at Fergus, who had a warm smile on his lips, wondering what they had talked about in the hall. Halima's heart raced as Magnus leaned in while he sang, I Found a Kiss. She felt her hips sway to the notes of the blues song. She remembered him playing this song during his audition but had never known the lyrics. I just want to tell you that I can't resist. I found a love that I need, yeah. Her face turned red as his eyes stayed on her. Yeah, it will be, that I want to say right here. Her fingers pressed lightly against her lips, feeling them tremble as Magnus went into the solo. She had never had anyone sing to her before. She was always the one with the microphone in her hand, and was quite pleased that Magnus wasn't skipping his lessons. The way the woman walks, you set my little soul back. The way you talk, she's my heart's desire, and oh, believe me. I figured I would die if I called her in the middle of the night. Yeah, ooh. Someone cleared their throat, covering the last notes of the song. Edna's doctor stood in the doorway. Miss Brown, did you bring enough for everyone? The female doctor in her mid-30s asked as she walked in. Nope, he's my little muse, Edna said, winking at her grandson. Now, Miss Brown, you know the others will want their own show now, the doctor said, scanning the room. Could you give us a moment? Sure. Magnus, let's go get the ladies some coffee, Fergus said, motioning to the door. You know how I like mine, Halima said with a shy smile, giving Magnus a brief kiss. Yeah, Magnus muttered as her soft lips left his. You go ahead. I'll take care of this, Halima said, taking his guitar. She liked how a simple kiss could make him speechless. Magnus's face turned red as Edna, his mother, and Halima giggled. They left the room, and his father placed his hand on his shoulder. His father squeezed his shoulder as they walked down the hallway. It's good to see you happy, son, Fergus said, lightly patting his shoulder as they waited for the elevator. I'm sorry for our part in what happened with Iona, but at least she's in the past now, and it looks like that woman really likes you. Magnus couldn't speak, only nodding, his mind still blank from the kiss. Do you have any pictures of your house? Fergus asked, sneaking a glance at his son. Magnus pulled out his phone. Fergus whistled as he looked through the photos. Look at that land, it's beautiful. That's a big, nice house, son, he said, handing the phone back. It's on 100 acres, that's what Mom said after breakfast. Yeah, most of it is forest. Bet it's good for bow hunting, Fergus chuckled. He enjoyed hunting when he had the time. Wouldn't know. I just finished the tour over a month ago, Magnus said as they headed to the cafeteria, where there was a Starbucks kiosk. Ah, I see. Still, I'd love to try it if you let me, Fergus said, frowning at the long line. So, while we wait, what's life on the road like? If Brandon and George stopped taking the only bedroom on the bus, it would be awesome. But I get to spend more time with Halima. Other than that, it can be tiring, especially when the record label books another show in the same state. We have to rush to the next city. The roadies are lifesavers. I don't know how we do it without them. But when it's just one show and we're on the bus at night, it's peaceful. I had a lot to learn. Bobby Dean, the guy I replaced, left big shoes to fill, but I wouldn't trade it for anything. Are they? Fergus made a rolling motion with his hand. Yeah, they're good guys. They helped me a lot when I first got to L.A., showed me around, told me where to eat, where to go if I wanted to have fun. I'll have to thank them for looking after you, Fergus said. Magnus knew his father was old-fashioned, having lived through the AIDS scare in the 80s. Hearing him say that was surprising. So, you and Halima, what do you expect from that? I can't say. She's my age. No kids, if you were wondering. Her parents raised her in the Catholic Church. That's good. You know your mother, but I doubt she'll fuss much. She seems like a good Christian girl. Fergus nodded. Mom likes her, and she never said anything, but she got a weird feeling from Iona. Wish she'd told me, Magnus mumbled as the line moved forward. I know. Sometimes Mom is too quiet. But she's an old Southern gal, and you know how they are, Fergus said, gently nudging Magnus with his elbow. Yeah, Magnus nodded. They placed their orders and stood at a tall table while waiting for their drinks. Magnus noticed Edna waving shyly at him from a table with her co-workers. Well, in other news, your cousin Jenny is having another baby, Fergus said, sharing family updates that Magnus had missed. That's her fourth? Magnus asked, seeing Edna point at him, catching the attention of 2 women and 1 man. Yeah, I keep telling Drew if he can't use protection and Jenny won't go on the pill, he should either get fixed or have a bunch of kids to feed, Fergus chuckled. What'd he say? Magnus asked, knowing Drew might want that living in the countryside. I'm just paraphrasing. Fergus, if my missus wants kids, I'll give 'em to her. And no docs touching my... Well, you get the idea, Fergus said, enjoying Magnus's laughter. Yeah, that sounds like Drew, Magnus said, thinking he should visit his cousin. He hadn't seen her since his wedding to Iona. He nodded as Fergus talked about what different family members were up to. Here's the kicker. You remember your uncle wanting to start a shrimping boat company on the coast? Fergus asked, realizing what he had missed with his son while trying to push his own ways. Yeah, didn't you tell him he was crazy? I did. Again, I was wrong. He's doing well, even expanded his fleet. I don't get down to the coast much these days, too busy putting in bids as the economy picks up. Condon! I have an order for Condon! The barista called out. That's us, Fergus said, lightly patting the table. Just the way I like it. Halima sighed, holding her cup in both hands. Thank you, she said, giving Magnus another kiss. I think I'll keep you, she said with a shy smile. So, Magnus, we've talked, and we both agree Halima should come to Bill's wedding with you, Marge said, smiling as Halima snuggled up to him. Really? Magnus asked, feeling warmth spread through him. Making plans without me, huh? Magnus looked down at Halima, who took a shy sip from her latte, her cheeks turning red. Well, you made our first date a double date, so I thought I'd return the favor, Halima joked. You know, if you weren't so adorable. What? Come on, tell me, Halima said, trying not to smile. Her eyes went wide, her heart raced, and her hands almost squished her cup as Magnus whispered in her ear. Magnus! she gasped, playfully swatting his chest. "You're so naughty," Halima whispered. "Just you wait," Magnus replied, drinking his coffee. "So, Mom, what did the doctor say?" Fergus asked, ignoring their playful talk. He didn't want to break the moment when Halima seemed to be helping his son. He just hoped it would last for Magnus. Magnus could tell his dad was worried that Halima might be like Iona. He hoped she wasn't. "I finally get out of this place tomorrow," Edna said, excited to leave the hospital. Though she appreciated the care she received, she wanted to be in her own bed, or more precisely, the guest bed in her son's home. "They're going to take another x-ray to see how much the fracture has healed, so it'll be either a wheelchair or a walker. And I'll be there to take care of you and drive you to your physical therapy until you're healthy enough to go back home," Marge said, patting her mother-in-law's arm. "I appreciate that, dear," Edna said, patting Marge's hand. Another hour passed as they chatted, shared family news, and laughed before Magnus and Halima said their goodbyes. "Magnus, wait, please wait," Marge called out, rushing to catch up with them. "Yeah?" Magnus asked. "None of us have eaten lunch yet. Would it be okay if your girlfriend?" She smiled as Magnus blushed and Halima smiled. "Your father and I grabbed a bite to eat?" Marge asked, her dark brown hair brushing against her shoulders. "Sure," Magnus said, seeing Halima nod in agreement. "Thank you, sweetheart," Marge said happily, hugging her son. When she felt his hand gently soothing her back, she melted against his chest, holding him a bit longer before kissing his cheek. "I'll get your father, and we all can go together." "All right," Magnus said, raising an eyebrow at Halima as she rubbed his arm while his mother hurried back to Edna's room. "What was that about?" "Just trying to help, Magnus, nothing more," Halima admitted. "You know how close I am to my parents. I really want this to last, but if we do end up together, I want them to be part of our lives, even if not too much. I know they supported Iona, but they didn't have all the details. Once they did, they wanted to tell you they were wrong. But you were gone, not talking to them. You can't fix things if you don't talk. Please don't be mad," she said shyly, brushing her hair behind her ear and looking at the floor. "I really like you, Magnus. I don't want you to get hurt like Bobby did." "I'm not mad, just wish you'd told me first," Magnus said, kissing her forehead. "I'm sorry. I know I should have," she said, pressing her forehead against his shoulder, unable to say she loved him. It was too soon, and she didn't want to scare him away. She wanted him to look at her like he did when he first saw her at the motel door forever. "Well, shall we?" Fergus asked, once he and Marge had joined them. "Saturday night." "5 more minutes," Halima called from the bathroom, rushing to get ready for dinner with Magnus's childhood friend. She wanted to make a great impression on Mary Lou and make Magnus smile. That's why she had brought her red dress, just in case. She had spent the day at the salon to get her hair done perfectly. "Okay, no hurry. Our reservation isn't until 7:30, Magnus called back. He remembered how wonderful it felt to have her near him when he woke up that morning. It took all his willpower not to touch her while she slept. "I want this to be perfect," Halima mumbled as she put on her deep red lipstick. "It has to be perfect," she whispered, adjusting her dress. She looked at herself in the mirror, admiring how her dress showed off her shape. She wondered how Magnus would keep his hands off her while they were out. The thought made her feel warm. She had felt his warmth that morning and wanted to be close to him, but she wanted their first night together to be special, like tonight. "Okay." Her heels clicked on the tile floor. "I'm ready," Halima said, appearing in the doorway. She smiled as Magnus's jaw dropped. "How do I look?" she asked, spinning slowly. "Beautiful," he said without thinking. Her eyes ran down his light blue dress shirt, noticing how it fit his chest and arms. A hungry look flashed in her eyes at his reaction. "You look really good," Halima said, her eyes meeting his. She picked up her purse and put on the gold bracelet her mother had given her, along with the silver chain and locket from her father. "Now is my handsome date ready to join your friend for dinner?" Halima asked sweetly. Yes?" A slight smile lifted the corner of her lips as she saw Magnus's eyes darting from her to the bed. "I don't know if the world is ready for all that beauty," Magnus said, trying to be charming. "Then I guess we'll have to find out," Halima said, snuggling up to him. They walked out of the room, ready for the evening ahead. Her red high heels shone in the light as she walked over to him. Her hands felt the smooth material of his shirt as they ran up his chest. Her fingers danced along his chin as her lips hovered close to his. "You'll have to keep everyone else away, won't you?" Halima said, looking into his eyes. "Sounds hard, but I'll try," Magnus replied, placing his hand over hers as she touched his cheek. "Don't fall for anyone else, okay?" Halima joked. "Never, my lady," Magnus whispered, kissing her hand. Halima's heart raced. She felt warmth from her ears to her toes as his lips touched her skin. She wondered if Magnus treated his ex-wife the same way. "Silly woman," Halima thought. "But he's mine now, and I won't let go." "Come on, we can't be late," Halima said, taking his hand and leading him out the door. "Magnus!" Mary Lou called out as she stood next to her husband in a stylish black dress. "Wow, you look amazing," she said, holding out her arms to Halima. "Thank you. So do you. I might need to keep Magnus on a short leash," Halima joked. "Stop!" Mary Lou giggled. "Thanks for the spa day. It was exactly what I needed," she said as they hugged. "No problem." Halima waved her off. "Think of it as thanks for all the stories about Magnus," she said, putting her arm around his waist and giving him a sly smile. "Scott," Magnus nodded. Scott's sandy blonde hair shone in the light. His blue-green eyes looked at Magnus, trying to see the boy he once teased in high school. Magnus noticed Scott still had the bulk from his football days. "Magnus," Scott replied, nodding back. "Those muscles look good on you," he said, shaking Magnus's hand. Scott had been a proud athlete until an injury ended his career. Mary Lou had helped him through recovery, pulling him out of sadness. He soon saw how wonderful she was and asked her out. After proving he wasn't a jerk, they became inseparable. "Thanks. I heard about what happened." "She told you?" "Yeah. Did you sue the guy?" "Oh, yeah," Scott laughed. "I might have lost my spot, but I think I won in the end," he said, wrapping his arm around his wife. "Good answer," Mary Lou said, smiling up at him. "Well," Magnus said, looking at his watch, "shall we eat?" "Yes, let's." Halima nodded. "You're a rock star?" Scott asked in surprise as they sat around the table. "Yeah, didn't Mary Lou tell you?" Magnus asked, enjoying the moment as Scott shook his head. "Sorry, honey, I wanted Magnus to surprise you. Think of it as payback for how you treated us in high school," Mary Lou said, patting his hand. "Yeah, sorry about that. I was a total jerk back then." "It took losing my knee to see what was really important," Scott said, holding his wife's hand. "Don't worry about it, it's all in the past," Magnus said, smiling warmly. "How did you meet Magnus?" Scott asked, picking up his wine glass. "We were watching audition tapes after our guitarist died. We saw so many tapes, some were bad, others were show-offs. But Magnus's tape stood out. He honored our loss and played with heart. We knew he was the one. We invited him to L.A., and he impressed us during the audition. We worked him hard once he settled in L.A. and took him to his first show. He was so nervous backstage," Halima said, laying her hand over his. "Oh, I nearly forgot." "Forgot what?" Magnus asked, putting his glass down. "Do you have your passport?" Halima asked, her eyes twinkling. "No, I've never been out of the country. Why?" "Don't worry, Artie can help with that. Our European tour starts at the end of October. It's going to be so much fun," Halima said, excited to spend months traveling with him again. "You're going to love it." "Damn, man, I thought I was living the dream, but you really are," Scott said, raising his glass. "You better send me lots of pictures and bring back souvenirs," Mary Lou pouted. "Yes, Mom," Magnus said, making everyone laugh. "I need to go to the ladies' room. Will you come with me?" Halima asked Mary Lou. "Of course." "You two behave while we're gone," Mary Lou said, smiling at the men. "Sorry to hear about your ex-wife," Scott said once the women were out of earshot. "Thanks. Without Iona, I wouldn't be where I am now. Never thought I'd say that. There's always a bright side. Listen, I don't want to bring up work, but I'm also an investment banker. I don't know your long-term plans, but it's smart to save money for the future. I can help you with some safe investments. Just think about it," Scott said, handing Magnus his card. "You can contact me anytime. I'll help you if you have any questions." "Thanks, I'll keep that in mind," Magnus said, pocketing the card. "Now tell me, how did you meet that amazing woman?" "So what did you think of his family?" Mary Lou asked, checking her makeup in the mirror. "I'm in love with Edna. She's wonderful, Halima said, batting her eyes and folding her hands over her chest, making Mary Lou giggle. Too bad for Magnus, huh? Nah, our love will never be, Halima said dramatically. I got some real insight yesterday. And? It only made me want Magnus more, Halima said, plucking away a stray eyelash. Then I wish you the best of luck. Now let's see what the boys have been up to, Mary Lou said, smiling at her new friend, hoping she was what Magnus needed. Halima nodded. Magnus's beer shook slightly in his hand as he watched Halima and Mary Lou walk back. The way Halima's dress moved along her body and her eyes sparkled made heat rush to his face. He shot looks at the men watching her and his friend. I was wondering if someone had kidnapped you, Scott said, running his hand along his wife's back, signaling to the men whose eyes lingered that she was his. Oh, did you miss me, baby? Mary Lou asked, softly kissing her husband. Ew! My eyes, Magnus joked, making everyone laugh. He never thought he'd see Mary Lou with Scott, but he was happy for her. His heart skipped a beat as Halima gently turned his face towards her. Magnus, are you saying kissing is bad? Halima asked, her lips very close to his. No, Magnus answered, feeling weak as he looked into her warm brown eyes. Good, Halima whispered before giving him a slow, tender kiss. She softly nibbled his lower lip as she pulled away. Now I'm hungry. What's good here? She asked Mary Lou, taking her seat across from her, pleased by Magnus's dreamy gaze. So when are you leaving? Mary Lou asked as dinner was nearly over. Probably by the end of next week. Grandma seems to be doing all right, Magnus said, finishing his beer. You staying that long, too? Mary Lou asked Halima, who nodded. Then you two must come over Tuesday night. Let me cook you dinner before you leave, she said, looking towards her husband, who shrugged. We'll have to get Mom to look after the kids. That's not needed. I'd love to meet them. Your wife has been a good friend to me since I arrived, Halima said, giving Magnus a playful look. I don't want you two to go out of your way just for us. You sure? Matt and Donnie can be a handful, Scott said, surprised that Magnus, whom he used to pick on in high school, was now with such a lovely woman. I'm sure, Halima said, squeezing Magnus's hand. I hope you like catfish, Mary Lou said, already knowing what she would make Tuesday night. She wanted to give Magnus a taste of home before he left again, not knowing when they would meet again. Love it. Mom always made it every Saturday night, Halima said with a bright smile. Excellent. See, Magnus, she is definitely a keeper, Mary Lou teased, nudging his arm. The ladies giggled when Magnus could only mutter a, uh-huh. The night is still young and we have the sitter until 11. Do you guys feel like doing something? Scott asked, checking his phone. Is the Blue Gill still around? Magnus asked, referring to his favorite blues club. Yeah, last time I saw it, Mary Lou smiled warmly. A blues fan, huh? Scott asked with a coy smile. To my bones, Magnus nodded. You okay with that? He asked, looking at Halima. Of course I'd love to go, Halima said, wanting to spend more time with Magnus. Great. Let me just... Oh no, I got this one, Magnus said, taking the bill from Scott and putting his card in it, handing it to the waiter. You cover the club charge, he added with a competitive smirk. Men, Mary Lou said, rolling her eyes with a smile. Do you all want to ride together or take separate cars? Scott asked once they were outside. Magnus looked at Halima, smiling as she held his hand. How about we meet you there? He said, knowing it would give him time to joke around with her on the way to the club and back to the motel. You better not do anything silly to that young lady, Mary Lou teased with a mischievous grin. Who, me? I would never, Magnus said, pretending to be hurt. Okay, maybe just a little, he added, watching Halima blush. They all laughed as they left the Blue Gill around 10 o'clock. Halima clung to Magnus as the night air played with her hair. She noticed the sparkle in Mary Lou's eyes as she looked at her husband. Halima felt warm inside, remembering how Magnus had held her close while they danced. She had enjoyed every moment, feeling the excitement as she watched Magnus chat with Mary Lou and Scott. She knew their night wasn't over, far from it. This was one of the best dates she'd ever had. She rested her cheek on Magnus's shoulder, smiling back at Mary Lou, whose hands were interlaced with Scott's. Man, that was great, One of the best nights we've had in a long time, Scott said, and Mary Lou nodded. We have to do this again when you two come back to town. I'd like that, wouldn't you? Halima asked, looking up at Magnus. Yeah, I would, Magnus nodded. You're not so bad, he said, shaking Scott's hand. And you're not the dweeb I thought you were in high school, Scott said, shaking Magnus's hand. Take care, you two. Mary would be upset if you didn't make it Tuesday night. Oh, we'll be there, I'll make sure of it, Halima said, smiling at Scott. It was so good to spend this night with you, Mary Lou said, hugging Halima. You have my number, call me any time. A friend of Magnus's is a friend of mine. Maybe we'll become the hangout for the town's most famous person, she said, smirking at Magnus. If you keep making those cookies, you'll never get rid of me, Magnus joked, hugging his childhood friend good night. We better get home. The sitter is probably pulling her hair out by now, Scott chuckled. You better call me tomorrow, Magnus. You two have a lovely evening, or what's left of it, Mary Lou said, waving goodbye as Scott escorted her down the sidewalk. Come, there's something else I have in mind for tonight, Halima said with an inviting smile. All through the drive to the motel, Magnus had to restrain himself as Halima gently rubbed his leg. As they got closer, her hand moved higher. By the time they parked, Magnus was feeling very excited as Halima ran her fingers up and down his neck. He kept his cool while watching her dress fit her perfectly as she left the car. Halima threw her purse onto the bed as soon as they entered the room. She kicked off her heels, knowing they would get in the way. She turned to Magnus once the door closed, holding his cheeks in her hands and kissing him eagerly. She felt his back hit the door as she kissed him deeply. Oh, and what's that? Magnus asked with a smirk. Your pleasure mixing with mine, Halima said with a smile. Her body quaked as he released, sending waves of bliss through her. Halima woke up to the sound of a phone ringing. She turned over, noticed the empty bed, and smiled when she heard the shower running. She picked up the phone from the nightstand and saw it was 6:45 a.m. She hesitated but thought Magnus wouldn't mind if she answered. Hello? Halima said, rubbing her eyes. Halima? Marge said, surprised. Why are you answering my son's phone? He's in the shower. Oh, I see. I'm so sorry, Marge stammered, realizing why Halima was there. It's okay, Halima chuckled. Is there something you need from Magnus this early? I wanted to know if he would come to church with us today, Marge said, feeling embarrassed for calling so early. I'd love to see your church, Halima said, sitting up excitedly. You would? Marge asked, starting to smile. Yes, Halima nodded. Let me ask him, she said, getting out of bed and opening the bathroom door. Magnus? Yeah? His voice echoed in the shower. Can we go to your church today? Halima asked. Even though she couldn't see him, she felt his eyes on her. Why? Your mom asked if you would go, and I really want to see it. Can we, please? Halima pleaded as the steam from the shower touched her skin. All right, if you want, Magnus said, washing his face. Thank you, Maggie. She laughed when she heard his loud sigh. So, what time should we be there? She asked, going back to the phone. Service is at 11. We could meet for breakfast, or you two can come over and I'll cook, Marge said, pacing in her bedroom. Are you sure we can come over? Halima asked, shuffling her foot on the motel floor. Of course, dear. I'd love for you two to come over. My home is always open to you. You are my son's girlfriend, Marge said. I want you and Magnus to feel welcome here. It's not the same when he's gone, is it? Halima asked. No, it isn't. I've missed so much. I understand, Halima nodded. Look at me, sharing my feelings with you, Marge said, wiping away a tear. Don't worry about it, Halima reassured her. Opening the bathroom door again, she called out, Maggie, we're having breakfast at your parents' house. Wait, what? You heard me. Breakfast, your parents' house, church, one after the other, Halima said firmly. You're lucky you're so cute, Magnus teased. Don't you forget it, Halima shot back, laughing as she returned to the phone. When should we be there? Does 9 o'clock sound good? Marge asked, happy. Sounds great. Now to see if I can talk him into shaving that beard, Halima said, smiling into the phone as Marge chuckled. Hey, I like my beard, thank you. So do I, Halima replied, but it's a bit rough. I've never heard it called that before, Marge laughed. Well, I hadn't either, Magnus muttered. We'll have to make a stop then, he said, turning off the shower. Why? Halima asked, watching him as he reached for a towel. I don't have anything to shave with, Magnus said, running his hand through his beard. Keep the beard. I like having something to hold on to, Halima replied, noticing the look in his eyes as he walked towards her with the towel in hand. Her eyes widened and her breath quickened as he whispered sweet words into her ear before taking his phone from her. I'll be quick, she managed to say, laughing as he playfully swatted her. Hello, Mom, Magnus said, grinning at Halima as she shut the door. Morning, son, Marge said, smiling at hearing him call her mom for the first time in 10 months. That's some woman you have there. She sure is, Magnus said, drying himself off. It seems like you two are getting along well, Marge noted. I hope it lasts. Me too, Mom, me too, Magnus said, thinking about the night they shared. Magnus, I'd really like it if you could stay for Sunday dinner. I don't know when you'll be back in town. Okay, Mom, Magnus said, surprising Marge. You mean it? She asked, thrilled. Yeah. Oh, that makes me so happy. I can tell, Magnus said with a chuckle. I was thinking of making French toast, sausage, and hash browns, Marge said. Magnus's stomach growled. I think you mentioned that on purpose, he said, hearing his mother laugh. I'm not saying. We'll see you soon, and Magnus? Yeah, I love you, son. Love you too, Mom, Magnus said, ending the call. Wow, it's so smooth, Halima said happily, her eyes shining as they sat in the driveway of Magnus's parents' home. Her hands touched his newly shaven cheeks. I need to kiss it, she exclaimed, covering his face with sweet kisses. You can do that anytime you want, Magnus said dreamily as Halima pulled away. I'll remember that, Halima said, smiling as the morning sun lit up her yellow dress. She waved to Marge, who was standing by the front door. You look good, but we need to do something about that hair, Fergus said, with his arm around Marge's shoulder. Fergus, hush! Marge laughed, gently hitting his chest. Thank you for coming, she said, holding out her hands to Halima. My pleasure, Halima said warmly as she took Marge's hands. Look at you. You're glowing, Marge said. Thank you, Halima replied, giving Magnus a shy smile. Come on, you must be hungry, Marge said, linking her arm with Halima's and leading her inside. Magnus, thank you, Fergus said, holding his son back. You don't know how happy you made your mother this morning. You can be upset with me, but at least talk to her. She's missed you. I see you're playing the victim, are we? Magnus smirked. If that's what it takes, Fergus nodded. Honestly, I just want to move on. I don't want to bring any anger into this relationship. It would only cause problems, and I don't want that for Halima, Magnus said, looking towards the house. You really do care for her, don't you? Fergus asked, smiling as his son nodded. I'm happy for you, son, Fergus said, giving Magnus a hug. Let's go join the women. Who knows what kind of trouble they're getting into, he added, putting a hand on Magnus's shoulder. With Grandma, it could be anything, Magnus agreed, sharing a laugh as they walked inside. Hey, sweetie, Edna said, sitting in a chair with her arms open. So good to finally have you home again, she said, hugging him tight. Isn't that the truth? Marge said from the kitchen, preparing their meal. How's the hip, Grandma? Magnus asked, stepping back. A bit sore, but I'm not in a wheelchair. Thank the Lord for that. Amen, Fergus agreed. I see you've been a busy boy, Edna whispered with a smirk, making Magnus blush. She's a lovely girl. I wish you both the best in life, Edna said warmly as she held her grandson's hands. She watched him look back at Halima, who smiled shyly and tucked her hair behind her ear. Thanks, Grandma. That means a lot, Magnus said, turning back to her. See, if you stir it like this, the potatoes won't stick to the pan, and you'll get a nice even browning without constant stirring, Marge explained, noticing how closely Halima was watching. Magnus, can you set the table? She asked, smiling at her son. The potatoes will be done in a few minutes. Sure, Magnus nodded. Now for my trick with the toast, Marge said, inviting Halima closer. It's just the love I have for my family that makes it special, she whispered. If you remember that, everything you cook will taste 10 times better than any restaurant. Fergus, help your mother to the table. I'm on it, Fergus said, helping Edna to her seat. You okay? I'm fine, honey, Edna said, gently touching her son's face. But I need coffee. How do you take it, Edna? Halima asked as Marge pointed her to where the coffee mugs were kept. Black, 2 sugars, and a bit of milk, Edna replied. Perfect, she sighed as she sipped her coffee. Thank you, Halima said, her cheeks warming at the praise. Magnus, take these, Marge said, handing him plates of French toast and sausage patties from the oven. Put an oven mat under them, she added in her motherly voice. Yes, Mom. Magnus earned a big smile and a kiss on his cheek from Marge. That looks much better than that beard, Marge said, wiping off her lipstick from his cheek. Feels nicer, too, Halima nodded, making Fergus and Magnus blush as the women laughed. Halima blew Magnus a kiss and winked as he set the plates on the table. Everyone take your seats, Marge directed once Fergus and Magnus finished fixing their drinks. She held out her hand to Magnus as he sat at the end of the table. Fergus took his mother's hand, and they all joined hands, Halima's fingers sliding into Magnus's left hand, linking them all together. Let us bow our heads. Church bells rang in the morning air, calling everyone to the warm, inviting seats. Children's laughter filled the air as they ran around the well-kept grounds. Halima felt light as she walked with Magnus, their fingers woven together. They stayed close to his grandmother in case she needed help. Go on, Magnus. Say hi. I'll be all right, Edna said, winking at him. Go show off that lovely girl. Yes, do show me off, Halima whispered in his ear, wondering if his ex-wife was there. Yes, ma'am. Now you kids don't start any trouble, Fergus joked as Magnus looked back at him. And you're sitting with us, right? Marge said in a stern but teasing voice. I wouldn't miss it, Mrs. Condon, Halima said, smiling. Call me Marge, she said with a wink, pulling her husband back to give Magnus some space. There's Mary Lou, Halima said excitedly, waving as Mary Lou stood in her Sunday best while her children played nearby. My, look at the two of you, Mary Lou said with a sneaky smile. Leaning into Halima, she whispered, Did Magnus hug you tight once we left last night? Wiggling her eyebrows. More like it was equal, Halima said, flashing Magnus a coy smile. With that dress, I'm surprised you made it out of the motel room. Mary Lou giggled, enjoying the teasing. So, we still on for Tuesday? Scott asked, giving Magnus a knowing smile. Of course, I have to see these little monsters Mary Lou calls children, Magnus joked, wiggling his fingers at her. He smiled broadly as Mary Lou stuck out her tongue at him. The only thing monstrous was that beard, Mary Lou shot back. Hey now, I liked that beard. Then why did you shave it? Mary Lou asked, raising an eyebrow. Well, if he wanted a kiss again, I wanted a smooth chin, Halima said, caressing his bare chin. Mary Lou was at a loss for words, and her husband seemed stunned too. So, it's true then? Mary Lou asked, referring to the article. You read that? Magnus asked in shock. Yeah, Mary Lou said bashfully, looking away. I'll text you the details, Halima giggled, patting Magnus's arm. Matt, Donnie, Scott called to his sons, knowing the sermon would start soon. Coming, came a reply from the group of children. Magnus, Halima, meet Matt and Donnie, Mary Lou said, presenting her sons to them. Matt, Donnie, this is Mom's childhood friend Magnus, and his girlfriend Halima, Mary Lou said, resting her hands on their shoulders. Hi, they said together. Hello, Magnus said, squatting down to their level. He felt a wave of sadness thinking about the family he had once hoped to have with Iona. Halima placed a hand on his shoulder, and as the sun shone on her, he felt a new sense of hope. Watching her, he could imagine a future together, something he never truly saw with Iona. I'm Magnus, and you are? Magnus asked, holding out his hand. I'm Donnie! The 2-year-old giggled as Magnus pretended his hand was being crushed. I hope you don't have such a strong grip as your brother, Magnus said with a smile. Matt nodded, laughing with his brother as Magnus played along. You've got some great boys, Mary Lou Scott, Magnus said, watching Mary Lou pat their heads. Yeah, we do, don't we, honey? Scott replied, looking at his wife. That we do, Mary Lou said dreamily, gazing at Scott. Ew, Matt and Donnie said together as Mary Lou and Scott shared a kiss. Totally agree, Magnus teased, making Mary Lou laugh as she leaned on her husband. Quiet, you, Mary Lou said, giving Magnus a playful push. Or no more cookies for you. You wouldn't, Magnus gasped, pretending to be shocked. Anything but that, he pleaded, making Halima laugh. I would, Mary Lou said with a mischievous smile. You're so mean, Magnus said, pretending to be hurt. Don't forget it. We should go inside, Mary Lou said, seeing Scott nod. Are you sitting with your family? Yeah. Can we join you? Mary Lou asked, looking at her husband. You don't mind if we sit with you, right? Scott asked, looking at Magnus and Halima. Not at all, Magnus replied with a friendly grin. Let's go then, Scott said, as Fergus walked beside his mother up the ramp. Mom, Magnus called, catching Marge's attention. Mary Lou and her family are joining us. They're always welcome, Marge said, waving to Mary Lou and Scott. So you're still coming over Tuesday, right? Mary Lou asked as they climbed the steps. Of course, Magnus nodded, watching Matt and his brother run up the steps. Well, if it isn't Magnus Condon, good to see you again, Reverend Maddow said, shaking Magnus's hand. And who is this lovely lady? He asked, smiling at Halima. This is Halima, my girlfriend. Oh, I thought you and... Reverend Matos started to say. That's over now, Magnus said, feeling Halima squeeze his hand. Ah, say no more. I'm sorry to hear that, Reverend Matos said, patting Magnus on the arm and welcoming him inside. I know some of you look forward to my long talks, the congregation chuckled. But I hear we have a special guest today, Reverend Matos said, looking at Magnus. We'll miss him in town. Magnus saw some heads nodding, but we wish him luck and safe travels. Why don't you come up and say a few words? Reverend Matos invited Magnus. With his mom squeezing his hand and Halima whispering kind words, Magnus walked past Mary Lou and fist-bumped Scott. He smiled, feeling how strange life can be. Seeing the church band set up, he decided to speak from there instead of the pulpit. Can I speak from here, Reverend? Magnus asked. Sure, go ahead, Reverend Matos responded. Thank you, Magnus said, seeing Reverend Matos nod. Some of you know I had to leave town. Some of you don't, and that's okay. I learned some tough lessons. Lessons I didn't want to hear, he said, seeing his grandmother wink, his father nod, and his mother hold Halima. Sometimes things happen that turn your life upside down. They make you feel lost, but sometimes there's a light at the end, Magnus said, looking at Halima. I wasn't sure if I could make it in L.A. People I didn't know helped me, showed me the way, and became friends. I'll always be thankful for Halima, Brandon, and George, Magnus said. He saw his mother resting her head on Halima's shoulder, her eyes shining with happy tears. Let's hear you sing, Magnus, Scott shouted. Magnus looked at Mary Lou, who nodded. Would that be okay, Reverend? Magnus asked. Reverend Matos nodded. Can I use your guitar for a moment? Sure, go ahead, the teenage girl replied. Thank you, Magnus said warmly. He adjusted the volume on the cherry-red Fender Stratocaster. This song might not be usual for church, but it means a lot to me. It reminds me of someone special. I do now, Halima called out, her voice shaking. So you do, Magnus said with a playful smile. Here's Disturbed's The Light. With the pick in hand, Magnus began to play. Like an unsung melody, he sang. The truth is waiting there for you to find it. It's not a burden, but a remedy. He thought about his past, a clear reminder of how it began. Memories of fights with his ex-wife surfaced, deep inside your memory. He noticed younger church members recording on their phones. You turned away, as you struggled to find it. You heard it call as you walked away. The ruins of his failed marriage echoed in his mind. A calm voice in the silence. The anger from seeing his ex-wife on that table bubbled up, and for what seemed like forever. Meeting Halima washed away that anger. You waited, hoping it would call out again. He remembered their late-night talks. You heard the shadow calling? Then your fear kept you blind. You held your guard as you walked away. He recalled her presence on stage, hoping he wouldn't mess up. When you think all is lost, listen to me now. He smiled, thinking of their conversations while traveling. Hope's not lost. You never need to feel broken again. Her smile filled his mind. Sometimes darkness can show you the light. Magnus watched Halima as she sang along. This isn't what you think it is, he said. Get ready for something big. She had her phone in her hand. When your world seems to fall apart again. He saw her looking at him while they sang. Don't be scared. Don't look away. Halima stood tall, her voice filling the room. Don't let hope fade away. Let the dark help you find the hidden thoughts. The church organ started to play, going perfectly with his rhythm. So the door can open again. In your darkest memories, the answer is there if you look for it. Don't let hope fade away. He played the solo carefully. It's sickening, weakening. Don't let a sad outcast take your spirit. He locked eyes with Halima, their bond clear. You need to be strong, tough. A bit of dark rekindles the fire in you. Light the fire in you. He played softly as the song ended. He bowed to the cheers and gently put down his guitar. He mouthed thank you to the girl, who smiled widely. Halima ran down the aisle, her yellow dress flowing as she reached him. I love you too, Halima cried as Magnus lifted her. Whistles filled the air as they hugged tightly. 7 months later, Magnus proposed to Halima on top of the Eiffel Tower. She said yes with joy. Magnus went to his brother's wedding and shared his worries about El May with Bill, who promised to be careful. Magnus also told his family about his engagement, and they were very happy. He and Halima held a small gathering at his home in Montana, calming down any concerns about the location of their wedding. Halima wanted a private ceremony to avoid media attention. Brandon and George were excited and gave Halima many wedding ideas during their trip to Europe. A year later, Magnus and Halima got married. Even though their wedding photos leaked to the press, Magnus suspected Brandon, who always smiled when TMZ showed the photos. Magnus decided to let it go, feeling happy for the joy they all shared. None of that mattered. What mattered was holding the woman he loved every night, finding peace in her embrace. A year later, their baby girl Gwen was born. Halima stood in the doorway watching Magnus hold their daughter. He gently rocked her, calming her from a restless sleep. What he didn't know was that Halima had called his mother on Skype. Watching him sway as their daughter peeked over his shoulder made her smile. Fly me to the moon and let me sing among the stars. Magnus began to sing a Frank Sinatra song. Let me see what spring is like on Jupiter and Mars. Fill my heart with song and let me sing forevermore. You are all I long for, all I worship and adore. In other words, I love you, he sang, kissing his daughter's head. Oh my, she's adorable, Marge said, seeing her granddaughter on the screen. Magnus turned around at the sound. Her dad isn't half bad either, Halima said, admiring him. That's not fair, Magnus teased, sticking his tongue out at her. Magnus, when are you bringing my granddaughter to see me? Why don't you come to us? You sure? We don't want to intrude, baby, Marge said. Since he had sent the photo of Gwen's birth, she had wanted to come over right away. But their relationship was still healing, and she didn't want to push her son away. I'm sure. Right, little Gwen? Magnus asked, looking at Gwen, who gave him a toothless smile. Yes, we're sure. We'll be there first thing in the morning, Marge squealed with joy. Bring Grandma. Little Gwen would love to see her, Magnus said, smiling at Halima. We will! Oh, I need to pack! Fergus, get our suitcase! Marge shouted. We're going to see our grandbaby, she said, answering his unasked question. Bye, baby, bye, Halima, bye, my sweet, adorable thing, Marge said, waving into the camera before ending the call. Is this everything you hoped for? Halima asked, leaning against the door frame. Wouldn't change it for the world, Magnus said, leaning in to kiss her, showing all his love. Iona cried at her desk as the news of Magnus's marriage spread online. The day he left her, she had no choice but to marry Connor Baggs. It wasn't her best decision. For nearly 2 years, she had stayed in a loveless marriage with a man who cheated on her, just as he had done with his first wife. She couldn't use the infidelity part of their prenuptial agreement because he could use it against her as well. She wasn't ready to raise a wild 2-year-old by herself. So she lay there when Connor came to her, thinking about what she had lost as he touched her. She had gained 15 pounds from emotional eating and always frowned at Connor once he left. She wondered why she had ever fallen for his words and ruined what she had with Magnus. Now she followed everything about her ex-husband online. Iona, why are you crying? Asked another worker in Connor's office. Iona was lucky it was a man and gay, otherwise Connor would have been all over her if it was a woman. That could have been me, Iona cried, showing him the screen with Magnus and Halima's wedding photos. Oh, honey, it's okay to have dreams. No, I was his wife. I threw him away for that. She pointed towards Connor's office. Don't believe me? She opened her desk drawer, pulling out the last photo of her and Magnus that Connor hadn't destroyed. See? She held up the photo of her and Magnus in her wedding dress. "And you chose that?" the man asked, pointing at his boss's office in shock and disgust. "I know," Iona moaned, resigned to her fate. "Hey, audience! If you liked this video and want to keep up with more thrilling stories, make sure to subscribe to Prince Cheating Tales and hit the notification bell. You don't want to miss out on our upcoming adventures. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next wonderful story."